Black Rifle Coffee, baby. Freedom fuel.
It's been a while. It's been a while since you've sat down. Have you ever? You've been on this podcast, but it was just years ago because we rebranded it three times now.
Gosh, that's been
years.
Years. Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Mm-hmm. What? So we were talking about this earlier. We were talking about Scouts of America and how you think they got a raw deal in the last. What is it in the last decade? Is that really, or has it been like 20 years of just negative propaganda? You think?
Oh yeah, with the Scouts, and so with my wife and I we're den leaders, and our kids are in Scouts, boys and girls, and it's a phenomenal program. I tell people about it, and they're like, "What? Scouts is still around? It didn't fold?" And I'm like, "No, it's still very much alive, and it's a phenomenal program. I mean, Scouts obviously implemented some stuff from protections there for the kids, as well they should. Any program that does that should, and they do a really good job on that. And yeah, it's a phenomenal program. I'd highly recommend it to anybody.
Well, I think the things that were interesting just 5 minutes ago that we were talking about was older people. I don't want to say boomers, or let's say our generation or other generations always talk about these kids today, but really what they need to say is these parents today, or these parents of yesterday have fucked up their kids. It's not their kids. It's always the parents. It's not as if like it's immaculate conception and then a child is born and they're just a fucked up piece of shit. There's typically somebody involved in that variable.
The parallel that I like to tell people is, and you'll remember this in Special Forces, right? When a team leader would come, when the officer would come to the team, and we used to say, if that, because officers are only on the team for a couple of years and then they leave. Yeah. And we used to say, if that officer leaves and he's fucked up, it's not his fault, it's the team's fault.
Right.
Because we didn't raise and mentor and mold that officer into being a good special operations, special forces officer. That's the team. And it's the same thing, right? With parents, I think when people say the retort I like to say when people come up and they go, "Kids today," and I go, "Well, what are you doing about it?"
Right.
Are you sitting on your couch and you bitching about it, or are you getting out and you actually doing something about it? Because kids today, it is a tough world for kids, because we live in nonstop distraction. We live in nonstop fake easy dopamine. We live in nonstop scientific methods to try and grab their attention and sell something to them.
Right.
They live in nonstop foods that cause inflammation in their bodies. With now RFK has made this popular, right? And thank goodness, like seed oils and sugar and high fructose corn syrup and all this. And the kids today are grappling with all of that. And it's like, so for somebody to sit down and go, "Well, these kids today," and it's like, yeah. So what are you doing about it? What are you going to do to fix it?
Well, I think it's easier for guys like us because, and I don't want to say it's easier for guys like us. It's easier for people that have been put through hardship and been forced to teach other people resilience, effectiveness, teamwork, because we can see the substance of the results of teaching resilience. I sometimes find it hard. I'll go back to that, but with my kids, I try to teach them resilience, autonomy, problem solving, reinforce creativity, and really just love the shit out of them, because I also think that that's part of the military DNA. And a lot of guys, they come back and they're just too hard on their kids and they fuck them up. Like I got it. Like, combat was difficult for you, or the military was difficult, and that's the way that you want to raise your kids. But I don't believe in holding back on loving your kids, or I think that'll cause negative effects downstream. But the importance of raising kids that are self-sufficient, resilient, and creative, and intelligent. I mean, obviously they're born with X amount of intelligence, but I think as a group of veterans, we have an opportunity to plug in and create an impact in that. I mean, I see it all the time. I think about it every day I'm with my kids.
We so I teach at a wellness retreat, and it's interesting bringing up what you say is like guys come home, guys and gals,
Yeah.
come home, and it doesn't matter if it's a veteran or a first responder. I kind of lump first responders in with veterans at this point, right? Because for a variety of reasons, but when they're hard on their kids, really, I just look at that as a way of essentially ignoring, or, the fancy word for it is compartmentalizing those emotions. And we see this all the time, that the more those emotions get compartmentalized, they're like bricks, and that stack of bricks builds up, builds up, builds up, builds up, builds up. And then before very long, towards the end of, the person's life or midlife, maybe this is where the term midlife crisis comes in.
Right.
They've compartmentalized or ignored these emotions for so long that all of a sudden that stack of bricks that's on their back crushes them. And the very thing that they've been working so hard to control ends up controlling them. And they come to, we'll see them at the retreats, and the emotions are controlling their lives, and they're trying to gain some type of balance that's there because they were so off balance for so long because of culture, because of what they were taught or not taught as children from their parents, that all of a sudden, wham, that teeter-totter slams on the other side, and those emotions start running their life. And so that's where if it starts, like what you were saying with kids, it's just like you're super hard on your kids because you want to make them tough. And it's like, well, there is a place for that, but there's a balance that has to take place there. It has to, or we run into the problem. I mean, Jiminy, we're looking at it today, right? I mean, it's a whole bunch of unbalanced parents that have now the pendulum has swung back the other way, and emotion is completely dictating their lives, and we have the insanity that we're dealing with now. I mean, and that's the only thing. That's the only way you can describe it as insanity. I mean, who would have thought in 2024 we were arguing about freedom of speech?
It's completely insane. Like, and more importantly, it's completely insane that we're actually, there's a group of people that think that it's not important and that the government needs to control speech. Like, that's completely insane. Haven't we learned and seen this lesson so many times
it's
before?
Like nowhere in history has that turned out good. Nowhere.
You're never on the right side of history if you're into limiting speech and burning books. I don't know why that even liberals, like when I say this, like not even, but the fact that the Democratic Party went from the party of free speech, the party of the ACLU, the party of all of these things that would, protect all of these different individual liberties. That's what their big thing was. And now they're like, fuck it, let's burn the books. Hey, let's control the billionaires and their platforms because they're too.
What I say when I say it, how I say it, believe what I say, not what anybody else. It's insanity.
I love it, to be honest with you, because I despise wokeism in every form or fashion. I think it's the most illogical, the most completely insane and undefendable political platform / social experiment / communist propaganda horseshit. And so when I see these guys, like what I was telling, describing this to somebody the other day, I was like, these dudes are like 200 feet underwater in a submarine and someone opened the door. That's what they did. They're so stupid. So I'm like, I think it's fantastic because they're just getting bulldozed by people that are actually intelligent because they can't defend it. No. It's completely indefensible.
Well, and it's the example of it's all emotion.
Yeah.
So those bricks, those emotional bricks, and it's the people themselves, but it's their parents that have led them down that, right? And it's the shortcomings and the parents basically turning their children over to government to raise them in the public institutions that we call school, and all of a sudden these bricks build up to the point. I mean, that's a perfect example that the bricks are just literally crushing them, and total emotion has taken over. And there's nothing there that's reasonable and rational. It's just all, you're triggering me. You need to stop doing what you're doing. You need to change what you're saying. You need to change what your beliefs. You need to listen to what I'm saying. And oh, by the way, I'm going to go to my safe space and hide for a while. until I can calm myself back down. And it's interesting what we teach, at this, at our wellness thing is the exact opposite, where it's like, if you are triggered, then you should look at that and take that and examine it and peel that onion and figure out, okay, where is this coming from? Because the reality is it's an optic into the deep self.
Right.
But it takes courage to do that. I mean, it takes courage and it takes a lot of work because it ain't obvious. And sometimes it doesn't take something. It's not minutes. It's not even hours. It's not a ayahuasca. All of a sudden everything's going to be revealed. It's weeks and months afterwards. But, again, wokeism has never been accused of a hard work ethic. So
No, I think it's so interesting to think about and try to organize, why does this exist? And not wokeism. I'm just saying, like, illogical, unproductive behaviors across the just U.S. Because obviously you have a tactical background, and then you also have a healthcare background. And you've got like lots of different things, and you're also very interested. But if you're like, let's think about like the top 5 reasons why people are so fucked up. Because it's a good thought exercise just to understand from our perspective why people are so fucked up.
Well, I think really you can look to the past, right? If you want to know the future, look at the past.
Right.
And I don't want to get all religiously or anything. But there's a great parallel here, right? So if you look at the Essenes, so there were 3 sects of Judaism back in Jesus' time, biblical times. You had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. And the Essenes were kind of the hippies that lived out into the desert, right? John the Baptist, a very famous guy, was an Essene. It's now believed in some circles that Jesus was an Essene. Well, the Essenes looked at stuff, and they were kind of the esoteric-esque type of mysticism of Judaism that was out there. And so it's very interesting. But if you wanted to join their connected community, it was a process. It was actually hard. Even to this day, if you want to convert to Judaism, it's really hard.
Yeah.
You have to do a whole bunch of study, and it takes like a year of like legit study. But the Essenes kind of took that to the nth degree. If you wanted to get in to be part of the connected community, they'd say, that's cool. Take the next 3 years and cleanse your body. And then they would say, then you come back and you go, okay, it was spent 3 years. And they go, okay, you cleanse your body. And then they go, okay, now take the next years and cleanse the mind. And so you'd go out into the desert or the wilderness or whatever, and you'd cleanse your mind. And then you'd come back in and you'd say, okay, I've cleansed my body, I've cleansed my mind. And then they would say, take the next 7 years and cleanse the spirit. The physical, psychological, and emotional, right? So then they would cleanse the spirit for 7 years, and then they would come in. So what's the parallel there, right? How did we get to where we're at? You look at the toxic environment that we live in because of the foods that we eat and the things that we drink that are DuPont's dream that we're drinking nonstop chemicals. It's even in the water. We have to argue whether chemical waste that's dumped into our water, fluoride and chlorine and all this, and then it's running through PVC pipes that are adding to the toxins that then enter into the body. And we know now that inflammation causes stress, right? So this is the benefit of having a degree in science. We know that chemicals introduced into the body introduce stress, and stress is the great killer because stress elevates the cortisol, and then when the cortisol gets elevated, then your body thinks you're fighting a saber-toothed tiger. It's dumping a whole bunch of glucose. Boom, now we get cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, that then type 2 diabetes and obesity. And we look at these people that are overweight, they're horribly inflamed. The more that I studied, I look at stuff and I see people that are obese, and I don't go, oh, that fat lazy bastard. I look at that person and I go, oh my goodness, that person is unbelievably unhealthy.
Right.
Because that fat is sequestering. Fat is not just stored calories. Fat is actually sequestering toxins that are in the body, because as the body goes through its triage, it's like, crap, I can't deal with all this. And so it's grabbing this, and that's women with these huge saddlebags on the side, men with big bulbous bellies and stuff. That's inflammatory fat that's taking place. That's the belief is that's where keto flu comes, because you start releasing the fat stores.
Interesting.
And you start feeling like crap because your body's releasing toxins.
Oh, wow.
And so now drawing that parallel, like cleanse the body, right? 3 years to cleanse the body. So how did we get to where we're at? Oh my goodness. Because now we've got, in science we'd call it a positive feedback cycle, but everybody else would call it a negative feedback cycle or a negative pattern. We eat toxins that then downregulate how we feel, which means we downregulate how much we get out and we move around, which then and so we get this cycle that takes place. And then all of a sudden we're living in the pure limbic brain, boom, and it's pure emotion. And now we're reacting to every single thing that happens because that's how we survive when the sympathetic response is kicking in.
Right.
Saber-toothed tiger attacks, boom, I've got to be able to react versus be able to plan out and move forward. So that's where there's hope. Thank goodness we've got somebody like RFK that's beating the drum and waking everybody up, right?
It seems crazy to me that there's even a debate as to whether or not RFK is the right choice for this position based on his predecessor. Which one is? I love the memes where there's just the juxtaposition between the previous and then RFK, because if you can't see the blatant difference, you don't need to read anything about these two people and their resumes. You just need to look at pictures of them. You can quite literally define that position if you were like, hey, pick A or B for this position, just based off a picture. That's it. Which one would you choose?
Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't even make sense why this is a debate, man.
The 70-year-old who's knocking out pull-ups and
who's
jacked. He's jacked. You know, he might have figured something else figure out something for him.
Right.
And we could probably, curate some of the knowledge for ourselves. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I know. But again, what are people going to gravitate towards? It's that internal echo chamber, that cognitive dissonance that it's like, yeah, see.
Well, I don't think people want. I don't think they want to be held accountable either, because their comfort in their complacency and they're comfortable in their laziness. At the end of the day, it takes work to be a little bit more disciplined. It does. And I think there's this default mechanism within the majority of, when I say majority, I think there's probably half of the United States where their default is always, that's human nature, it's going to be towards the easy path. It's so easy in the United States to just default to like arbitrary existence of just kind of like a quagmire of fucking Twinkies and Netflix.
It's like that most insidious thing you can do to a human being is remove ambition.
Right.
You give them just enough they can survive, but then you make the gap so big that it's really hard to thrive. We see this with the Afghans that have come over from after the fall of Kabul and stuff.
Right.
Where it's like they get enough. I mean, there are those exceptional people that have jumped the gap and they're actually doing very well right now. But there is a group of them that it's between the help that the government gives them and making that jump of self-sufficiency. It's a big gap. Well, the Afghans aren't alone there. That's really, if you look at America, that's symptomatic throughout all of America. And it's like, I'm not saying do away with welfare, but what I am saying is when we remove ambition from human beings, and we've seen this over and over again, they will then become reliant upon whoever it is that's handing them food, subsistence, or whatever that is. And that builds in that laziness. I mean, we can extrapolate that idea and really just say, what happens to parents? What happens with kids whose parents give them everything? I mean, in the old days, we used to call them spoiled kids.
Yeah, spoiled brats.
And so now, and then what happens? It's the Willy Wonka, my favorite movie with Gene Wilder.
Like the OG one with Gene Wilder? That's the one.
That is the best movie ever. But it's like, what do you get? The Oompa Loompas are singing about the girl who turns into the blueberry.
Purple, the blueberry. That's right. God, I can't remember that song. I've watched the new one recently with the kids. I haven't seen the old one for a long time.
So, but I think that's that is the case, and we've got to differentiate between loving your children unconditionally and spoiling them,
right?
Because you can't buy love, right? And we see this, and this is a commonality that we see. It's like, what, I'm buying you a whole bunch of presents. What do you mean you're having a problem? You can go to dance and you have all the computers and you have everything that you want. I'm showing you that I love you, and it's like you're trying to buy love, and that doesn't work. That's actually causing more problems into the psyche of that child as they grow up, because now what are you teaching them? The tools that they're then going to transfer over to their kids is like, well, I have to do is buy them stuff and take them to Disneyland once a year and go on vacations, and then all of a sudden, then they're going to be happy, and they're going to transfer that to their kids, and so now we get this downstream. So that's the danger, right, of living such a blessed life that we have here in the United States. Is we snap our fingers and we have just about anything, right?
Yeah, you can pull over every 5 minutes in this city and get 2,000 calories of sugar and fat.
Yeah,
like at any point in time, and for less than $3, right? Mm-hmm. I'm grossly exaggerating, but you guys understand what I'm saying. Where I think if we go back to this question of, I think about this a lot. Like, what's wrong with people? It's too much. And when I say it's too much, psychologically, people are obese as well. So it's the obesity.
That's great.
It's everything. You have access to everything all the time. Mm-hmm. You have more calories than you need. You have more psychological and stimuli. You have all of these things, and it's too much. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important things that we can do, and you and I aren't becoming motivational speakers, is saying no. And it's hard. It's difficult. And what I used to like I was telling somebody this, it was like, because I make fun of Jared still all the time for being fat. I was just like slap food out of his mouth. Like, it's so funny because he'll be going to eat something, I'll just like slap it out of his face. But it's true, because too much alcohol, too much SSRIs. Like, so you have too much lack of sleep.
It's inflammation.
Too much. It's just too much. Mm-hmm. So your bodies, I just don't think they're built to take on this much sugar, this much fat, this much stimuli, this much. Everything is too much.
The most addictive substance that human beings come into contact with, and you can argue this, so that's a gross statement, but arguably the most addictive substance that human beings come into contact with is sugar.
Yeah.
And sugar in the body is toxic. Right. Now, there's a whole bunch of people out there that are screaming right now when I say that. But that's the role of insulin, because the glucose levels go up, and then insulin rises to drive it into the cell so that it can then get into the Krebs cycle and produce ATP, blah, 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 blah. But the problem you run into is when the sugar is, because sugar is addictive because it's a survival mechanism. Because as we were evolving as human beings for the last thousands of years, sugar was nowhere in our diet. The only time sugar was, the example I like to tell people is walking around the mountains exercise? Yes. Is foraging around when you're walking around the mountains exercise? Yes. Then how do bears get fat?
Yeah.
Because they gorge themselves at the end of the year on berries, right? Mm-hmm. And fructose is almost exclusively converted to fat into the liver, and you elevate the insulin. And then when the insulin is elevated, your body sequesters some of those calories and stores it as fat, because historically the only time that happened was, guess what's coming? Winter,
right?
Where ain't no food, and you better have some fat stores or you're going to die. But now with modern society, we have, and then the thing that happens there is dopamine was released in the brain. So every time you eat sugar, or every time you think about eating sugar, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is highly, highly, highly addictive, which makes sense in terms of survival. So then all of a sudden, now I'm eating, and so I get this dopamine spike, but then I go into what's called the trough, right? So how do I get out of the trough? Ask a heroin addict.
Right.
Do more heroin. Boom. So then I'm back out of the trough, and I'm back on the peak, and then it drops back down, and I'm back in the trough. I got to get out of the trough, so what do? I eat another donut, and I get out of the trough. It's quite literally, it's an addiction. So Overeaters Anonymous, that was treating overeating as an addiction, it's very true. And then every time you have this sugar, you create this inflammatory response that's in the body that leads to all of these other diseases. The diseases, or your body trying to react to that, causes even more inflammation in the body, and you feel like crap. So what do? You eat more sugar, so you can get another dopamine hit, or you sit and you play on your phone without activity, and you get this wicked feedback cycle that drives you into the ground.
I think about it a lot, where what you just said with sugar specifically, and then sugar and fat, because I think the two of them work like left punch, right punch, left punch, right punch, because it's the two, and it's the combination of the two.
Yeah,
it's a combination. What I'm
and when you say fat, we've got to differentiate between oils, seed oils, and fat.
Right.
Coconut fat, avocado fat.
Good fat, bad fat.
Good fat, bad fat.
Sugar and bad fat. So the combination of those two things. If you were to say, Evan, and ask me this question, so I'll just ask myself this question, which is, I think there's this thing that goes back to triage, and when you know that something's wrong in any, we'll call it in any emergency situation, you have to save yourself before you can save other people, right? It's like, that's kind of like self-aid, buddy aid, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that you have a very sick country because of excess caloric intake, and then they're shoving SSRIs on top of it, because you've essentially poisoned, and then inflated you've made an entire country psychologically and physically obese, and then you've drugged them to make them fucking happy. And that, to me, is where we start. So RFK and Make America Healthy Again, I think it's honestly one of the cornerstones of being able to recover this nation, from my perspective.
It's the Essenes, right?
Yeah.
You want to come into the community with spiritual enlightenment, clean up your body first.
Right.
How do you do that? Well, let's clean up the diet. Let's clean up what we're eating, and then all of a sudden we start feeling better. So we want to move. Happy people, or content people, depending on how you look at it, they want to move. They want to get outside. They want to see sunshine. They want to get that vitamin D. They want to interact with friends and with family and move around. That right there is really the key. Whereas you heal the body, or start down the path of healing the body. When you're in pain, right? And the people that are out there will resonate with this. Like, so I've broken my back a couple of times. And when you're in pain, all you can think about is getting rid of the pain.
Right.
That's it. It was like, okay, I'll worry about that whole spiritual hippie stuff later. But right now, I can't move. If I twist wrong, it feels like a lightning bolt going.
Right.
You've got to remove, and inflammation in the body is no different. We have to show these people grace. We have to show these people some empathy, so that it's like, hey man, you don't look at fat people like they're fat and lazy. You look at fat people or overweight, obese people as unhealthy. It's like, hey man, you're unhealthy because your body is trying to heal itself with all of those toxins, with the soybean oil and all of this other manufactured, super processed food that our body is. What is this garbage you're
Do you
feeding
think
me?
I've thought about this too? Where do you think that there's a witting or unwitting participation between what I would say is big pharma and we'll call it big food?
That's a great question. So, and I think it's my brother and I have had this conversation quite a bit. My brother builds the race cars, and we think it's kind of a $20 bill that's on the beach, right? To draw like a parallel. You're walking down the beach, and if you see a $20 bill, what are you going to do?
Pick it up.
You're going to pick it up. You're going to be like, woohoo, I must be living right. Thank you, God.
It's such a good.
And so one of our retreats, we had a gal that was there. She is 70. She was 72, 73 years old. She's a therapist.
Right.
Had her master's degree in psychology, but she's a therapist. And anyways, one of my things, I get up and I talk about some of this stuff as part of the thing, because we try to balance IQ, EQ. Anyway, so I'm talking to her, and she goes, I want to tell you something. I'm like, yeah. And she goes, my first bachelor's degree, she was like, I went to Berkeley. Now, she's 72, so this is Berkeley back in the 70s, right?
Yeah, right.
And she was like, and as a nutritionalist, if you wanted a job, you had to go get a job with big food, with big ag, but big food,
Really?
Specifically. She was like, that was the only place anybody with a degree in nutrition could get a job.
Right.
And she was like, and a few of our classes were on learning how different foods and food combinations affect the brain. And so we would learn about these foods affect the brain in a positive way, releasing dopamine, because dopamine's addictive, right? And she was like, and we learned. She was like, it was common knowledge back then, but this is the 70s, right? It's the lost knowledge. But she was like, we learned because if you were going to get a job with the big food, you had to have this. So you knew what foods that they were combining together so that they could get the end result that they were looking for, which was people eating more food.
Right.
So you think about when we were kids, if you wanted to lose weight and you wanted to put on muscle, they told us to eat 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Well,
drink a gallon of milk.
Drink it.
You remember that shit?
And it's like
the milk.
But who's making money off of that, right?
Yeah, right.
So now going back to is there this collaboration between big pharma and big food? Well, so now you've got big food, right? That's coming in and saying, okay, these food combinations are doing this, and then I don't think there was like some secret meeting between the two entities. I think somebody looked over and observed, and it was like, oh, crap, we've got a rash of addiction that's going on right here. How do we capitalize on this? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at modern medicine, right, and being in modern medicine, I can attest to this, we treat symptomatically. We don't. We're just now starting to pick up speed on preventive medicine, but we treat symptomatically. Like I just had my stuff up at the VA, and they're like, okay, as the symptoms come up, we'll treat the symptoms. No word anywhere about like, okay, let's dig into how can we cure these problems. We'll just treat it symptomatically. And so, and I have my own theory as to why that happened. So in the United States of America, if you get in a car wreck, there is no better place on planet Earth to be if you want to survive.
Right.
It is the United States of America in a level 1 trauma bay. You have the best chance of surviving. If you have a massive heart attack, best place in the world to be is right here in the United States of America. Preventing that stuff from happening, I can think of just about anywhere else in the world I want to be. Versus, but we're gaining ground, right? RFK, there's hope. RFK is in there, and what he's talking about is all preventive stuff. Remember the Essenes and curing the body, healing the body. That's now has kind of become the mantra of the drum being beat of what that is. But the issue that you run into is like, who's going to make money? Intermittent fasting is a phenomenal modality that's out there.
Right.
Nobody's making money.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Except for you, because you're saving money because you're not eating as much. But it goes beyond just the caloric intake and everything else that's taking place internally in the body. But again, big pharma's not making money. Big ag's not making money. Big food's not making money. Geez, the government's not even making money off that because you're not paying taxes.
The interesting thing is that the government, which is, when I say this, like I'll be misquoted, but the government is the protection at times for the people, right? It's the voice of the people.
It's supposed to be.
Unfortunately, it's become the voice of corporations. And their constituents, they get lost between the people that donate to their campaigns and the people that vote for them to be put into office. So I think part of that, and I mean, I've thought about this a lot, where you're trying to understand how money is put into politics, maintaining free speech, but also being able to separate from PACs and super PACs and things like this. And thank God we were able to, go through this last election and get some competent people that are not like completely owned by what I would say is corporate, bought and paid for by corporate interest. And by the way, I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't give a fuck if you don't like what I say. I don't really care if you don't agree with me. It's just my 2 cents, which is you had a gaggle of, kind of unwitting and witting, low IQ bureaucrats that have the right resumes that essentially have been co-opted with mainstream media and other corporations to speak to one half of this country in order to co-opt it for corporate interests. And I'm not saying everybody's like this. I'm just saying, like, this is just my 2 cents. And thank God we were able to, like, push back and take over, House and Senate and executive office. And then, more importantly, this entire thing around, well, Elon is like I see it coming out of like MSNBC or wherever. It's like you have people like Rachel Maddow or Morning Joe, that fucking lobotomized idiot, talking about how Elon is a moron. It's the most ridiculous statement that could come out of a stupid person's mouth, like in the history of making stupid statements. This is a guy that has 40 points of IQ probably on somebody. Is launching rockets. This is the wealthiest guy in the world. And you have a person in their highest achievement is to read off a teleprompter for a video camera. It's awesome. It's like it's what was I saying to somebody? I was like, man, it's like I think what it reminds me of and is like, I can't say this in a political way. Actually, anyway, I can't say it in a political way, but anyway.
But this is what happens. So you have people that are there that are like that because it's marketing, right? And so you've got somebody that can elicit that emotional response. So when you have a population of squeaky wheels that are controlled entirely by their emotions. I'm not saying we need to wipe emotions away. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's got to be a balance between the IQ and the EQ. You've got to be reasonable and rational, and it's got to feel good and right. Reasonable and rational is really good, but that can lead to horrific things. Like Nazi Germany is a perfect example. Reasonable and rational didn't turn out so well. We've got 25 million people that died in World War II. So reasonable and rational is important, but you also have to look at feels good and right. Well, feels good and right is important, but if it takes over, then you end up with a whole bunch of wild Mustangs that run around. And what I like to say is it's fight, flight, feed, fuck, or fuck off.
Right.
Is essentially is like the pure emotional quadrant taking over. They don't do anything but lay around and it's like, oh, free love and happiness. Well, that ain't gonna build anything either.
It's like Haight-Ashbury. It's like in 1968, just a hippie circus.
Exactly. And it's like that's where there's got to be balance that's in there. You need both. It's vitally important.
I've thought about it a lot too, where people that want the government to take over control and safety for their lives, there's a place for you, which is you should go live in a prison. That's really safe. There's a place for you.
I almost spit out my coffee.
It's fucking safe, man. You got armed guards. You got like jail. You can just like go in and go, hey, lock
Bubba
me up.
once in a while. You got to be careful about Bubba.
Yeah, all the sex you want. But it's like the rest of us are like, man, I want to live free. That takes accountability. It takes responsibility. It takes real shit.
I think if you poll the vast majority of people, at the end of the day, they just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
Think about when we were in Afghanistan, right? Yeah. If you talk to Jamal on the side of the road who's out there, watering his dirt, it's like, Jamal, what do you want? And he'd look at you and he'd be like, I just want to be left alone. Yeah. That's what I want. Just leave me alone. Just let me do my thing, and I'm gonna. And I think you could say the same thing about Iraq. You could say the same thing about Africa. You could say the same thing about. It's like at the end of the day, people just want to be left alone. And I think that's how we kind of get to these buildups of government taking over. Yeah. Is because people are like, I don't care. I'm worried about my family and stuff. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like you end up with this oppressive government and you're like, oh, crap. How did that happen?
But you and I talked about this years ago, and you explained this to me. Like, Jeff is like the Jeffisms of the last 20 years of our friendship, 20 plus years. The Jeffisms. And you're like, there is no political party. See, you told me this like 20 years ago, maybe, I think. Like, there is no political party. There is no such thing as a Democrat or Republican. It's control and less control. Mm-hmm. So it's either, it doesn't matter. If you're a Democrat or Republican and you want more control, you fall into this spectrum of people. If you want more individual accountability and more liberty, there is no left or right. There's either more control or more individual liberty.
Yep.
There is no Democrat or Republican. I was like, that was probably one of the single best things politically that people, like anybody had taught, like literally taught me. It's like a 30-second conversation you and I were having. Like there's less control and there's more control. There's individual liberty, there's less fucking liberty. There's no Democrat or Republican. There is more or less control. So fuck off with your parties and just go for that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where it's like the whole, all of these different ideas and whatnot that's around there. That's where I can honestly look at it and go, I don't care. You do you. You whatever's happy with you, you do you. Don't push your beliefs on me. It's like, so I was a missionary for my church, right? And it's like, you know how many people I baptized on my mission?
Zero. Because I have this strong aversion to pushing my beliefs on other people. Yeah.
It's like I do me, and I'm super happy with me, right? But I have this aversion. It's like I'll tell you my opinion, and you can take that and run with it or not, and that's okay. That's okay. Because I don't know everything, and I'm certainly different now than I was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Geez, I'm different now than I was 3 years ago.
Right.
But that's kind of the point. We're supposed to progress and get better, we hope. But I have this aversion, and it's like at the end of the day, just leave me alone. Leave people alone. Let people live their lives, and they'll amaze you with like how industrious they can be, how innovative they can be, how peaceful that they can be if you just leave people alone. And that's where like wars are just old men and women making money while young kids die.
Yeah, it's interesting how we think of things very similarly. I don't want to control other people. I have zero ambition to tell other people what to fucking do. I don't want to. Like it sometimes frustrates my wife because she's like, well, what is there anything you want me to do? Is there anything like I won't even tell her that I have like a laundry list of things that need to get done because I have zero interest, which is funny because running the fucking company for 10 years, I have like zero interest in telling like free people outside of my company. I have like zero interest in telling them what to do. I don't want to put my thumb on anyone. You know why? Because I don't want anyone's thumb on me.
Right.
Like, period. I think a lot of it is this fear that people have of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And they want this great blanket of protection that is provided by the federal government in the form of, Joe Biden and his, ministry of nitwits. And it's like, or whatever. It could be anything. It could be, the sheriff down the road or,
Sure.
I mean,
we saw it during COVID, right? I mean, government just did not do a good job. Like all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is what the founding fathers were talking about. You've got to make sure that it's like, whoa. I mean, we saw people go like
loopy,
pure tyrannical,
dude.
like overnight. And it was like, oh, this is what they were talking about. I mean, is there any doubt that had they had their druthers, it would have turned into...
They were talking about going door to door with the military, injecting people with the vaccine. You remember that?
Yeah.
It's completely insane. It's like, if you don't have a mask, you're going to jail. They were like cuffing people and put them in the back of cars. They were throwing people in jail for being on the beach outside. Dude, these guys went full fascist overnight. And they're like, but it's for the protection of the people.
And this really encapsulates, I think this really shows... have you read the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Scholzen? Man,
No.
it's a brutal read.
Really?
It's rough. Yeah, because it shows I would say it's a brutal read, but it's an essential read. If you're having a great day, this will definitely bring you down. It's like, ooh, okay, my teeter-totter was a little bit too happy. Right. This is pulling me back down, Jordan Peterson talks about it all the time, and it should be a required reading. But I had this epiphanal moment when I was sitting on a beach somewhere and I was reading it, and I had this realization. You know, Lennon used to talk about the useful idiots, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And for people who don't know, like the Gulag Archipelago is when the communists took over in Russia, and all of the atrocities that started happening that were there. And he went to what was called the Gulag, which was the prison camps that were out in eastern Russia.
Yeah.
And then they were essentially slave labor camps. And it was interesting is all of the, not all, but the majority of the crimes against what we'd classify crimes against humanity was not being perpetrated by Stalin, although he was the one that was at the head, right? But the crimes were being perpetrated by the bureaucrats.
Right.
It was the bureaucrats that had gotten completely out of control. And so, and I had this realization as I was sitting there reading it, and it was like, oh my gosh, the useful idiots are not really the college students anymore. The useful idiots are our politicians, the legislators that don't write the legislative bills. So the very thing that we are paying them for, they don't do anymore. Nancy Pelosi, when they passed the healthcare bill, and she said, well, we have to pass it before we know what's in it.
It's always a good idea.
It was, and it's like, so you haven't read it, so that's dereliction of duty. You haven't done your duty. Your duty as a legislator. And what's happened is they've abdicated their responsibility to the bureaucrats, which taking this back to COVID, right?
Right.
Mask mandates. A mandate is not a law. That is not a law that was passed by the United States legislative body. It was a code or a mandate that was pushed in. And then all of a sudden, if you start looking at a bunch of this other stuff, RFK brought it up where he's talking about like psychedelics, right? So for the use for mental health and stuff, he's like, I'm gonna deschedule all of this stuff.
Right.
Well, that scheduling was made by the DEA. It wasn't made by the legislative body. Drugs were, but that wasn't made by the legislative body. ATF is another example. So we have these bureaucrats that are completely out of control, and that's the hope right now, right? With Elon and with Vivek and all these guys, it's like, guess what?
I have so much hope for the government. I have more hope for my government than I have in my entire adult life.
Ever.
Because I hope there's going to be less government.
Yes.
That's the hope. For me, like I'm a less government guy. I'm not a total libertarian because I think that there are some positive attributes to what I would say is the political philosophy of libertarianism. However, I fully understand that we need certain things because in the purest form of libertarianism, there are no borders, there are no TSA requirements, there are no
that's anarcho-libertarianism, and that's
far
chaos,
left chaos, extremist version of.
And that doesn't work. Go to Somalia,
and
it doesn't. You'll quickly see that doesn't work.
And but I have so much hope in this because, to your point, and Mike Lee, I've talked about it on the show a couple of times. Mike Lee did a great podcast with Tucker where he talked about the offboarding of responsibility from the legislative body to bureaucrats. And part of the reason why it works and why it's worked for politicians and why the legislative body got to do this is because now they can blame the government. So they can say, elect me again and I'll fix it.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. So they've essentially outsourced their legislative responsibilities to the bureaucrats. So they take accountability for what their original job should be, which is legislating. But now they've done this and said, well, fuck it, it's the ATF. Well, elect me, I'll fix the ATF. No, elect you to take accountability for what we pay you to do. And it's crazy that people are like, for me, I think about it all the time. And I mean, obviously you got a law enforcement background too. I'm like, man, we have spent a lot of money enforcing suppressor laws, right? And I'm not going to go on a 2A rant, but how long does it take to get a suppressor? And then you have to reapply and get tax stamps, and you have to do it every time. Every time. It takes like 6 months, 9 months, unless you get a trust, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. It's like, guys, I have 20 suppressors now, and I have to do the same thing every time. And it's like beating your head against the wall. I have how many SBRs? How many, all these, and you have to do the same thing every time. And it doesn't make sense. So, and I'm just like not going to go on a 2A, rant about this. So we have to go through all of these hoops to exercise our constitutional right. And then we have to do it over and over and over again. And then when the ATF comes out with a mandate that changes, you roll out of bed, your feet hit the floor, and all of a sudden, the thing that they used to call a pistol brace is now an SBR, and you're a felon. Yeah. What? That's insane.
It is.
And unlike the fact that they could just do it without any legislative oversight and action, is like limitless stupidity. Like the fact that we've been able to forfeit our liberty to do that.
Yeah, and it's, and if the legislators abdicate over to the bureaucrats, then all of a sudden what happens? Well, we keep reelecting those legislators so that they can quote unquote fix the problem. Yeah. Well, the reality is now all of a sudden it's like, do they really want to fix the problem? No, they don't. And so and that's the big argument with like big pharma, right? It's like, well, and as Americans, we're guilty of this. We want silver bullets, right? So we get a pill. Well, all those pills that you get have side effects, all of them. And so now all of a sudden I give you a pill and you're on that pill long enough, whatever that's for diabetes or heart or whatever that is. I give you a pill. There's a side effect. So then I go to the doctor and I say, hey, I'm having this side effect. So what does the doctor do? He gives you a pill to fix the side effect. Yeah. All pills have side effects. So then I take that for long enough, and then what happens? And then by the time you look at a geriatric, and the problem is, it used to only be geriatrics, and now it's not geriatrics. We're seeing 30-year-olds that are on 10 and 15 different medications because they're taking medications for their medications. So now all of a sudden, if you're big business, big pharma, woohoo, you got a customer for life. That's great because now now all of a sudden
you've 10x
your profitability, and you can forecast out
you can
what your
model it
profitability is going to be because you have lifetime members. So now when you start figuring out the total value of that member, profits go through the roof. And there is no motivation to fix that.
No. Before we get off this topic, my favorite medical side effect to hear is anal fissures. I don't know why. I'm just like, every time I hear it, I'm like, what the fuck is that? I don't even know what that is, man. It sounds really bad, but it's, I know what it is. I think it's super funny, though.
But, it's interesting. Did you ever, talking about like COVID and stuff, did you ever see a vaccine commercial from the pharmaceutical company?
No.
Not somebody talking about getting the jab like a state or something, but from the pharmaceutical company. Have you ever wondered why?
Probably for liability issues, I would imagine.
You just said it. So where did you hear that side effect? You were listening to some ad, and they have to, by law, have to list the side effects that could happen.
Right. But they couldn't do that because they didn't understand, or they did understand, or they didn't understand the possible side effects for whatever it was. So they legally would have had to have disclosed it. So they went to influencers instead. Is that what you're telling me?
Ba-dum-bum. So you think you're getting the truth from whatever influencer because
Beyonce, fucking she's a smart chick.
Because we're tapping into primal man, right? Because
Kardashians.
Because it's in our DNA that we follow those influencers because thousands of years ago, those influencers were the great hunters and great leaders that lended survivability to us, to the tribe, right?
Yeah.
Well, that DNA is still in us. So now when an influencer gets up and says something, unless they've been discredited or whatever, we tend to listen. And if we don't listen, we have to make a cognitive change in our brain that we don't listen. Mm-hmm. And so now all of a sudden you get those influencers. Well, guess what those influencers don't have to do? They're not going to talk about anal fissures.
No.
They're just going to go, I use it and it worked for me.
Yeah. Plus, when you're getting paid $10, $20 million to get, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a shot, maybe it isn't a shot. I tend to not over dramatize conspiracies in the sense of
it's a $20 bill.
Yeah. Just like and why do they care, right? It's like whatever the football player is from the Chiefs that got paid like $20 million from Pfizer to take the shot. Travis Kelce, is that his name? Yeah. Good for him. That's cool, man. You want to do that?
That's his choice.
That's his choice. The problem is that when people are intimidating other people into doing things that they're uncomfortable and or they want to be skeptics. They want to question it. They want to pressure test it. Like one of the things that we have to have with this company is I have to have a board legally. Like I'm legally required, like by federal mandates, essentially, to have a board. And like I'm pressured, which is a good thing because the board pressure tests what the executives are doing. Mm-hmm. So weird in business that you want people to shoot holes in your plan, your forecasts. And in some ways, you're legally liable if you don't. But in individual lives, when it comes to, we'll call it like any of these topics that we just talked about, which is like you can't health shame somebody, or every size is a good size, or go get this or go get that. Now, all of a sudden, it's not okay to be a skeptic and ask questions of your government. By the way, the same government that throughout history has essentially retraded every deal possible they could with the American public. And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust it. I'm saying you can't trust bureaucrats at the moment in history, and you absolutely have to pressure test everything they say.
Well, and I mean, on the medical side, right, there's this little thing called the Nuremberg trials that happened, that the big thing that came out of is like, hey, man, you can't do medical experiments on other human beings.
Right.
And so, and if you're coercive or you lie or you force, it's not just against the law in the United States. It's actually, it's against international law because it's immoral, it's unethical, and it's illegal. And when you give somebody some type of medicine, that's why every medicine that you get has got a list of side effects that are on the side or someplace that you can go so that you can read what those side effects are, so that you can then be educated on what you don't get something for nothing, so you can get educated on what those potential side effects are going to be. And it is the job of the medical professionals that when they give you something, whether that's the doctor or the nurse, and the nurse tends to be the one that's the educator when this comes around, is they're supposed to tell you what those potential side effects are, and they're supposed to look at the other medications, because medications interact with each other, and make sure that that medication is not listed as a contraindicated for these other medications that are there. And so when we coerce people, either through shaming, blaming, or complaining, to do a medical procedure, whether that's a shot or whether that's a surgery or whether that's a pill, it is illegal. It's immoral, it's unethical, and it is illegal to do so, period. That is international law. And we learned that, thank you very much, because millions of people got experimented on in World War II, not just by the Germans, but the Japanese were guilty of that stuff too. And so it's all of a sudden we looked around, and the Russians, the communists, were doing it. And so we looked around, we're like, this cannot happen. This is egregious to the conscience of human beings. This cannot happen. But again, why are we debating this today? It's like we're debating the First Amendment. Wait a minute. Why are we talking about whether we can say freedom of speech? And people will go, well, you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. And it's like, okay, that's a straw man argument. Okay, get out of here with that. And it's like, it's disinformation. And that's where I go, in science, everything is evolving and changing. We know more today than we knew yesterday. Every day. We look at the simple single cell, right? Right. We used to think, like, go back to Darwin, right? And everything came off the single cell and the theory of evolution. And we thought that the simple cell, the single cell, was like a super simple entity that existed in nature. We now know that we're just scratching the surface. And that cell, look at cold plunging, heat exposure, and now we know that cancer is a mitochondrial dysfunction. We know mental illness is mitochondrial dysfunction. And so now all of a sudden we look at cold plunging. Why is cold plunging great for you? Because cold plunging adds to the brown fat. It activates the brown fat. Well, what's brown fat? It's fat that has more mitochondria in it. We're increasing the efficiency of and efficacy of the mitochondria in the cell. And we now know, we used to say, oh, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Yes, and we now know that it's kind of the motherboard of the cell, and that it's actually moving around the cell and helping with the receptors and pulling stuff in. So to say that it's like this is disinformation is such an gross statement from anybody, and trying to erase what other people may be questioning in science, because science should be hotly debated. It should go back and forth. It should go through the cauldron of fire and get beat to hell by all of the peers that are there. But the problem is we don't have that, and we're trying to stifle everybody else's opinion because it's like it's false information or whatever. False information according to who? Because we now know that half the crap that we believed, I don't know, the food pyramid, is complete horseshit.
Right.
And it's killed millions and millions of people, because we had a bad piece of science that everybody believed in that we now know, oh, we had some Harvard professors that got paid off so that they would bless off on this thing. And Keyes is the guy that came up with, and he cherry-picked his data for the science that then put in for the low-fat diet, and then caused the obesity epidemic. And then it's the $20 bill. What does Big Ag do? Well, now we add glyphosate so that we can grow more food. And then we do GMOs that destroy the gastrointestinal tract of the insects that they eat. You don't think that doesn't happen to you too? Oh, we have celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and all of that in human beings now. And you're telling me that isn't contributing at least a little bit to what that is?
But even if you were to just be completely, like, if you were to take all the white noise, right? So just take all the white noise out of it, and you just look at it purely from empirically driven evidence, from the population itself, like being objective and saying, okay, we can directly track the obesity rate from the United States from, we'll call it World War II to now, because I think that's, and having it just, literally hockey sticks. So from World War II to now, you have the rise of psychological malfunction. So you have psychological malfunction, obesity, and you have all these different factors that are ultimately, I think, downstream effects from what could be a huge solve. From a macro solving perspective, you could take this lack of fitness in America and you could chop all the white noise out and say, we have to have a fitness revolution in this country. And if we were like, we need to educate our children, and we say, oh, we need to educate our children on nutrition, like the value of, growing your foods locally, procuring your foods locally, eating a well-balanced diet, which is like, I tend to be on this, in this like very single focused with, my diet specifically is like, I eat meat, vegetables, and fruit. I don't eat anything for the most part. Yeah, of course, like I have bread and stuff every now and again. However, it's very limited. And if I would have known that as a kid, because what would I do in the mornings? I would load up a giant bowl of generic brand Cheerios, pour a mountain of sugar on top of them because they tasted like shit without the sugar, drown it in 2% milk
or skim
milk. And
sugar.
Yeah. So then, and then I'd get sleepy. The first thing that would happen is like, I'd be falling asleep and, 9:00 in the morning. And,
first or second period class.
Right. Yeah. And then it was told, remember back in the day, it was told to us, carbo load.
Yeah.
And so I carried that all the way through probably into my 20s, where it was like carbo load. So I would eat pans of oats with brown sugar on them and then go out and run, 15, 20 miles, depending. And then I would go back and do the same thing. I wasn't eating the amount of fat that I needed. I felt like shit all the time. I'd have these low energy points throughout the day. so even if you're just doing experiments on yourself and just being objective and not only the data that's available to us, looking at the obesity rate, looking at the foods and saying, how do you feel now? You can draw some of your own fairly solid, like empirically driven data to say this is fucked up. We can fix it this way. And I'm not saying it's an overall 100% fix. I'm saying you could take very big macro sections of this and put in good solves. Like the just say no thing from back in the day. I don't know if that solved anything per se, but at least we used to have like fitness, like a nationally sponsored fitness programs that went through all the schools, and they took out PE. They took out all these things because PE somehow became like, which leads me into what I was going to talk about, which is like this witting or unwitting participants in this grand conspiracy, which to your point, I don't think that there's like a cabal of big industry working together to do this. I think they're participating in the monetization when it benefits them and then driving the narrative. Yeah.
And I think if you look at, so you've got physical, psychological, and emotional, right? And then the physical aspect is like a three-legged stool, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got physicality, exercise, working out. You've got nutrition, the food that you're eating, and then you've got hygiene and order, right? And if one of those legs of the stool gets short or is gone, what happens to the stool? Well, it falls over, right? So, it's like Lustig. If you've seen him, Dr. Lustig, he's an endocrinologist. He's kind of one of the first guys that started beating the drum about metabolic issues that were happening in people, and that it was the sugar, it wasn't everything else. Gary Taubes, who wrote Why We Get Fat, based a bunch of his stuff off of Lustig. Lustig is phenomenal, and in that, what he talks about is if all of a sudden your exercise cannot outrun your diet. And I've got a buddy of mine, Dave, right? He's Mr. Utah like 5 times back in the day. And Dave once told me, and this was back in the 90s, Dave was like, Jeff, and Dave, like he had striated glutes before any of the pros had striations in their glutes. He was phenomenal physique. And Dave told me one day, he said, Jeff, 75% of bodybuilding is diet. And then I just recently watched a interview with Lustig where he's like, you cannot out exercise your diet. So it's that three-legged stool, right? You've got to do all things in combination that's there. And so your diet there, we've got to clean up the diet. We've got to get away from the chemicals. We've got to get away from the toxins. And then we have to get in and we've got to move, right? And whether that moving, the story I like to tell is like my mom, right? My mom's like this little old lady from the South. She's like 85 years old or something. When I was younger and stuff, I was like, Mom, you got to get out and you need to exercise, osteoporosis. And she's like, Jeffrey, I exercise every day. And I was like, you do, Mom? That's great. And she's like, I go out in the garden. And I was like, no, Mom, you got to jack weights. You can't go out in the garden. Well, then I got older and I got a garden.
Yeah, right.
And anybody who's done gardening is like, this is hard work. I'm going to go back to the gym. It's easier, But it's that exercise, because we now know, right? The muscles are probably one of the largest areas of the endocrine system for function. And the endocrine system is your hormones and your neurotransmitters. So if they're not moving, guess what else isn't moving? So now all of a sudden you got food that makes you sick, that makes you want to sit around and play video games, dopamine. And then all of a sudden you get big pharma that comes in and goes, oh, you're depressed. Have some selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors,
right? So
that we can try to capture that serotonin, which is contentment in the body, and keep it in there longer. But the problem is your diet is completely jacked up and void of the essential nutrients that you need for the serotonin to be produced in the gut so that it can make it to the brain. And so you have this huge cascading effect that takes place in the body. And it's like, well, no wonder the youth of today are jacked up. Back to our original stuff that we were talking about, right? It's like, no wonder the youth of today are having a horrible time.
Right.
Because we've poisoned them.
Yeah. Well, I think unintentionally. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people, my parents were guilty of this because they fell into this low-fat, high-carb diet phase, right? Because they were indoctrinated into this belief system. And yeah, my dad is a good example. My dad's like 80 years old. He's been working hard his entire life. He just works, and he doesn't overeat. He doesn't really drink. And it's not because of a religious or a philosophical position that he has. It's because that's the way he was raised. Like, they had their own garden. They had their own chickens. They were raised to not overeat and just eat what they needed and then work. So he works hard, still does a bunch of manual labor, and he doesn't overeat. And, you know, he's 80 years old. He just rode his Harley across Canada and back. And he has a lung
your
issue.
Dad's awesome. I love your dad.
He's super fun. He's super funny. He's really engaged. I think I want to go back because I was thinking about this the other day. So things about Jeff that you guys don't know. I've known him forever. We first met back in the day, and it's super funny. So I want to tell everybody how we first met, because this is like fucking
This is a great
awesome.
story.
Yeah. So I need you guys to go back to this movie Heat. There's a character in that movie called Waingro. So I was like fresh to SF, and we were doing this climbing. We were doing this climbing exercise in the City of Rocks.
City of the Rocks, Idaho.
In Idaho, and there's this guy, Tom Bigley, he's a former Delta Force dude, and he shows up, and this like homeless guy sits down next to me, what looks like to be some type of drug dealer homeless guy. He's got long hair, earrings. I think it was like a Metallica shirt, or it might have even been like something else. I'm not exactly sure. And I'm like, I turn to Tom and kind of like whisper to him under my breath. I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? And he's like, oh, that's Jeff. He's cool. Don't worry about it. I was like, all right. Well then, so come to find out, you know, like Jeff and I were climbing together, and then, you know, at that point, like you were working DEA.
Yeah.
And but and we were like sitting out on this rock overlooking. I think we just climbed up this rock, and we were sitting on top, and I was like asking you questions about X, Y, and Z. I can't remember. And this was 24 years ago.
So that would have been 1990.
No, it was 2000, because that's when I got out.
Was it 2000?
Yeah, it was 2000, dude.
Oh, okay.
And Jeff was like a serious guy. So like, you know, for a long time, he's a few years older than me, but he's pretty serious guy. Tom Bigley was a serious guy, and I am not a serious guy. Come to find out, like I'm kind of a fucking jackoff. And but Jeff and I became friends over multiple different things that we were doing throughout those years, and then ultimately we went to Iraq, but we were on the same team for quite a while before you went to take that team sergeant role. But really, you were kind of the team sergeant, even though, like I kind of referenced you earlier in Rogan's episode. And Jeff was one of those guys that, like, he was always ahead of everybody in these tactical trends in the special operations community. So Jeff had this he was like balancing on what was those balls called? Those
stability ball.
Yeah, the stability ball.
Yeah, Sissel balance. They're still out there.
So he had this ball, and he's like standing on it, and he's like flipping a kettlebell or something in his condo. And I'm like, this person is a crazy person, but he's crazy, interesting, and he thinks about things differently. And the point what I'm trying to make is, like, you've always been a bit of what I would say is a tactical contrarian in the point of view where you're always looking at things from the opposite direction. Everybody's going this way. Jeff's like looking the other direction, going, actually, let's take a look at this and see what might manifest itself from this position. And I'm not saying everything, because there's a lot of things that actually make sense, but you had these things, and this was years ago. You had these things, kettlebells. And I considered myself a fitness guy, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm a fit guy, and I used to run a lot. And Jeff had these things called kettlebells, and everybody knows what they are now. But back in the day, nobody had those. And you had the DVDs from Pavel.
Yeah.
Like, and you're like showing me this. You're like, dude, you got to check this out. these things will build, grip strength and power and explosiveness and all these things. I'm like, what the fuck ever? This guy, this is so crazy because it looks insane when you see a kettlebell for the first time and you see somebody flipping it around for the first time. Like it's like looking at a Martian. You're like, this doesn't even make sense to me.
Everybody's got to remember we're coming out of the 90s where everything was specificity and everything was a machine and everything was like locking it in so that, you were getting really specific on what the muscle is, only to find out it was like, yeah, that was a horrible idea.
It was a horrible idea. And so as we evolved and we went in through, our tactical evolution, Jeff and I went out to work at this place called the Direct Action Resource Center, which is where we have these they're like tactical Jeff and Evanisms that we would like. It was either you or I, and we were like constantly retrading ideas to the point where we'd come up with these sayings. Psychology is more infectious than the flu. Came from, as I remember it, and I talked about it on Rogan. It went semi-viral, but. Actually, it went really viral. I think it was like 50 million views or something like that. But psychology is more infectious than the flu. I think came from down there when we were working down at the Direct Action Resource Center, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
It came up. Yeah, I was actually. I think the term came from there.
Yeah.
Darcy's. It is still to this day after all the schools and stuff I've been to. It is the single best.
Yeah.
Close quarter battle school for teams that you can go to, hands down.
Period.
But I had kind of learned that when I was in DEA because being on the mobile team, when we would service all of our own warrants, and I could kind of see if people were stressed out, then everybody gets stressed out, and if we're kind of cracking like gallows humor on the way to the door we were going to kick, then everybody was lighter. And I didn't know the science behind that at that time, and which kind of ties into a whole ritual thing that I learned. But later on in life for doing assaults when I was in Afghanistan for so long. But what I realized was the executive function, the prefrontal cortex, decreases when the limbic system increases. It's a teeter-totter, right? So limbic is emotional. Well, guess what fear is? It's an emotion, right? And so the more stressed out we get, the more fear we get, the less we think with the executive function. And you and I have said this for years. Gunfighting is not a tough guy contest. Gunfighting is a chess match. It's really fast chess sometimes. But you've got to be able to outthink your opponent. Because if you don't, well, you're going to lose. You're throwing the dice. Maybe you'll win, maybe you'll lose. But it's a thinking man's game. It is not a tough man's game. And those that learn how to think are the ones that are successful in it. Well, you cannot think if the limbic system, the emotional side, fear, is taking over. So and we saw that at Darcy standing up on the catwalk where you would see like these guys going through and they're tired because it's long hours and it's at night and it's very stressful. It's painful because it's ammunitions. And you could see when somebody would get aggravated or the stress would kick in, you would see it like a ripple go throughout the rest of the special forces team or the combat controller or the PJs or law enforcement, whoever it was that was going through there. And you're like, oh, these guys are going to have a rough run. And every single time they just get their asses kicked.
I thought about that a lot over the last several years where the Darcy was such an interesting and valuable experience for me specifically. I think for you too, because you'd have rep after rep looking at people on the catwalk and seeing how they react to stress and tactical stress. And then there's a lot of you would inject or induce compounding elements that would increase the negative psychological effects. So you could essentially limit those and then focus on the task at hand while learning a new standard operating procedure. Watching people do CQB is one of the most fascinating things. Like teaching and watching, going back and forth between doing, teaching, and watching people do CQB is one of the most fascinating psychological experiments, I think, period. And it's one of the most valuable things in my life, seeing it, because you see how teams react. and seeing how one individual can affect the entire team, and how those second and third order effects of negative or positive psychological effects and understanding the team standard operating procedure, understanding it, and then understanding unconsciously competent and skill level ones and all these things and how they're all put together. It is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And that's where for me, I was lucky enough, blessed enough, unlucky enough, cursed enough that like I had already been in the war, and then I'd come home and I'd work at Darcy.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay. And then I would go back to the war and we'd implement it in gunfights under high stress. And it's like, okay, yeah, that works or that doesn't work. And then come back, let's tweak this or let's do more of this. And then go back to the war and then come back to Darcy for a week or so. And so I got this back and forth. We went back and forth for a couple of years. And it was really in terms of like survivability, Rich, if you're listening, thank you.
Yeah.
Genius of CQB and being able to implement that overseas, in real world scenarios and prove it out and then come back and then look at it and then just understanding that it was like, oh, this is all psychology. This isn't a tough guy contest. This isn't the fastest, most accurate, the strongest. This is, it's like that old samurai thing that whoever can keep their calm, and you hear that and you're like, okay, you have to keep your calm. Yeah, until you're scared shitless in the dark. So it's like, what TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedure can I execute when I'm scared shitless in the dark? Those are good. Not to mean that I throw everything else away, but those are the ones that I can fall back onto for my tools, right? So that when I get into the practice of a fight, I'm successful, or my chances of success have greatly increased because I have these tools that I've learned that I can modulate and regulate my nervous system while I'm there. It was an absolute phenomenal advantage, and probably why I kept going back and forth to the war for so long.
Yeah, I think back on it, I try to be as objective and not paint myself as a hero or rewrite history in any context. So I really try to like perform audits on things that I think, just so I'm not reinventing my own history. But a lot of the things we were doing early on was based on our war experience. Then we'd come back and implement them into training. And you had this confluence of times because you had 90s era guys that hadn't been to combat, and then you had the GWAT guys that were merging together. And so you have to chop out the things that the SOPs from the 90s that just weren't working.
Yeah, so complicated.
It just didn't work. Like I remember,
I got an open window that's here, and an open door, and a long hallway, and everybody's yelling out what they got. And it's like, shut the fuck up.
I remember the first target. Like, there's so many different things that went wrong. But like the first target I ever did, there's so many different things that went wrong. So number one man through the door, we breached the door, and my index finger was riding on my mag release on my M4, and I flinched. So I flinched when the door. So I'm number one. I flinched when we fucking hit the door, and I dumped my magazine. And I ran through the entire house basically as number one, just looking for guns. I find myself on the roof with no magazine and two guys on the roof. And one, I never put my finger on a magazine. Yeah. I never put but I also realized all of that training that we had done around, okay, number one man, you go right, take two, or what.
Yeah.
I can't remember the bullshit that we used to do because it was so stupid. Number one takes one, number two takes two, which is corners. So you're doing, you're not doing limited penetration, you're doing deep penetration, multiple corner takes. But it was so flawed. And I realized, after, because we did a couple more, and I realized just right after that, I was like, this didn't work at all. You have furniture and kids and people, and like it was just absolute chaos. And what we had been
Or
training
somebody
for,
standing right in the middle of the door.
yeah, we had been training for didn't work at all. And I was carrying like 100 pounds. I had like 12 magazines, like 3 frags, 4 guns or some shit, a breacher shotgun, a fucking shovel, a sat antenna. You know, I can't remember all the crap that I had, but just going up 2 flights of stairs was like, oh, this is so hard, you know? And so it was like, okay, instantly came back, like chopped out all the weight. Was like, okay, get rid of it. Cause then, you know, we did a bunch of other stuff. It was like tire factories and like, dude, you can't carry 100 pounds of magazines.
No.
At 160 pounds. You can. You're just smoked.
You're going to move like a turtle. Yeah. Map check. Map check. I think we're lost.
Hold on.
I hit a target one night, you know, and I couldn't find my balaclava because we're trying to hide the fact that Americans run the target.
Right.
And so I couldn't find my balaclava, so I put a cravat, you know, bandito style on my face. So I'm breathing on it, and I get to, for whatever reason, I ended up on the roof. So I took the stairs to the top of the roof, and I get to the top of the roof, and I'm like, oh, I can't breathe. I'm smoked. I'm out of shape. Well, then I realized like my breath had made the thing moist. And so I was like, all I was breathing was my own carbon dioxide, right? So I was like, what is it? I took this thing off. I was like, you know, and one of my Afghans is standing next to me, looking at me like, what the fuck is your problem, Mr. Jeff? And he's like, are you okay? Do I need to do CPR? And I'm like, shut up, you know.
That like going back and forth though between like that Darcy and then going like, because I was working in Iraq, you were in Afghanistan, so I would go back and forth, and it was just going back and forth. Then you'd go do something downrange, and you'd come back and you'd implement it because you could see what was working, what wasn't working. And one of the things that I think Rich was talking about was they had done, like JSOC had done a bunch of data on casualties on targets and how guys were getting shot. Mm-hmm. And it's like 70+% of the casualties on targets were all from like room to room. They weren't in the actual room that guys were taking.
And that was World War II as well, yeah. Well, so, World War II was the streets, and then the next was the rooms, yeah.
So then, okay, well, then you have to look, right? So then you have to modify your SOPs to make sure that you're looking deep. Well, how do you look deep at the same time clearing the room that you're in? And how do you do that with a limited force? Because what I was working with wasn't a full endage force. It was like working with 2 to 3 guys. Yeah. So now, okay, we got to clear a bunch of rooms. We got to look 2 to 3 rooms deep. We got to look for the term that I coined was the statistical probability of threat, which was, I know this dude is not going to be standing in the middle of this room, more than likely, like shooting from me. More importantly, I can see that. That's really easy. I can see it. So I got to look for the things that I can't see. So I got to make sure that I'm like looking deep for the guys that are actually setting up to shoot us,
and clear as much of the room before you enter the room.
In where, you know, guys doing CQB, they'd collapse their sector of fire, and they'd be so focused on collapsing their sector of fire that they were looking at walls. Yeah. Like just like a concrete wall. And they would hold on a concrete wall with their muzzle. Like, you remember this shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you'd have to break guys out of their
cognitive bias.
Yeah. You have to say, guys, that concrete wall, and Rich, I love the way that Rich used to put this, because like, the Kool-Aid man are gonna come busting through there. I'm here. Hey. And like, there's so many different things that came out of there, because, and I can't remember if it was Rich or if it was you, but it was like, the more you peel the onion, the more it makes you cry. You know, like all of these different like tactical isms that came out of that. It's because the vampire, this guy Rich Mason, I love to call him the vampire because it didn't seem like he ever slept. But he also would drink like 2 gallons of Diet Coke, so I'm fairly certain that that had something to do with it. And he was so funny. Like, he is funny. He's still probably super funny, right? I just think back then you had so many different guys doing so many different things. And I used to put you and I, when we were in Afghanistan, fast forward a few years later, we were out and we'd do shit together out on the range. And so we'd like put on all our shit, go
do PT.
and go do PT.
Yeah.
And then we'd shoot left, we'd shoot right. So you and I were really big on shooting
the workout shoot.
Yeah.
The workout shoot out there on the KD range. And it's funny is because I had been doing that for, it's super popular now, and as well it should be, right? But at the time, like you were the only guy, you and Angel, who was a PJ that was attached to the CT unit. You and him were the only two guys that would do it with me. And it was like the other guys, like but they'd come out and they'd do it once, because the first time you do it, you can't hit shit. Because you're like breathing, because high heart rate, that is high breathing, high heart rate. That is a different kind of shooting than like sniper shooting or something. And you've got to, and so then all of a sudden it's like you and I would go out there every day and jog to the back gate, go to the grenade pit, throw a couple of grenades, then go to the KD range and do drills. So shooting right-handed and left-handed, high heart rate, high breathing. Yeah. And then we'd run back, then we'd jog back through the kill house that was out of the Hesco's, maybe shoot some there, maybe throw a couple more grenades. And that was the start of the day.
It was like so much fun. Like when I say that, it's like I'm not exaggerating it, because it's like hard work can be fun. But when you have limited or no limit to what you can use, so we could use AKs, we could use shoot whatever we want. We AT4s. If we're like, fuck it, let's grab a couple AT4s, let's launch a couple of those downrange. Like I can't remember, were we shooting RPGs one day? I can't remember if that was you or if it was somebody else. And I was like, I incorporated that it was like a 3-gun match out there on the KD range where I the third, it was like pistol rifle RPG. And it was so funny because it was just so ridiculous. Where we're like, fucking really? Like it's a 3-gun.
RPGs, man.
I
had respect for him beforehand, but then when I started shooting him, so Jason and I went out that same range you're talking about, and we had like 2 cases of RPGs. And we just shot RPGs. And of course it got stupid at some point. It was like,
so fun.
What happens if we shoot it at a 45-degree angle? And so it got stupid. And then it was like the next day, nobody was talking about too much overpressure back then. So it was like, whatever. And then it was like for the next 3 days, Jason and I had the shits. Because like the constant like overpressure from getting hit with that blast. Yeah, I mean, it was... That was the aspects of the war that was actually, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. There were a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun to be had. You can't say like I was talking about it a little bit. It's like, there's a lot of bad people out there. Like nobody should feel bad about going and hunting bad people. It's just like, who gives a shit? It's like ISIS and ISIL and all these other guys. They're just shitheads. They're not bad. They're... What the guys did wasn't bad. It wasn't immoral or unethical. It was the right thing. They're bad people. Could there have been a more efficient way for us to do it? Could there have been a more long-term physically and psychological benefit to it? Absolutely. But like, it's not like they were good guys.
Right.
Like they're not fucking good guys.
They're parasites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
bad. Anybody that's going to strap a suicide vest on a mentally disabled kid and send him out to the American, because that isn't just once. That was a commonality.
Yeah.
And then send them and go, hey, go over there, and then remote detonate this kid to kill not just Americans, but it's like they're killing Afghans too. And it's like, all right, man, you're a dick.
Yeah.
It's like there's no that's so outside the realm of anything that's even close to acceptable. And it was like people like that. It was just, they're monsters. You know? And that's just one of the many egregious things that these guys would do. And so
I think if they would have kept, if we fold back and we wanted to rewrite history the way that we want to tell it, I think if they would have just said, okay, Afghanistan was an ethical engagement. Like, I think it was a just cause, not to get confused with 89's just cause, and kept that a special operations specific engagement with low intensity conflict, covert action, and ultimately just special operations purely, with limited conventional support and basically no occupation, I think it would have been a much different story.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But you know, even when we had the might of the U.S. there, it was depressingly little rebuilding was even taking place.
Right.
I mean, like the Ring Road never got finished, and people say, well, it's because the Taliban kept blowing it up, and it was like commerce is what chills everybody out. Like if all of a sudden, you know, and this will run down a whole rabbit hole, right? But at one point, you know, I was in Kandahar, and let's see, was this 2009? At one point, the Afghan farmers were trading almost pound for pound raw opium for wheat because nobody was planting wheat anymore. And so we're having bumper crops of opium while the entire might of the United States is there. So Jeff's DEA Jeff is going, what in the hell is going on here? You know, and later on I was like, okay, because it ain't what you thought it was. And so now all of a sudden, but we do, you know, the roads were, you know, 2-lane roads, and they were crappy and they were potholed. And it's like, we've got the entire might of the United States in this country that's basically what, the size of like Texas or something. And it's like, and you're telling me we can't get roads built so that we can get commerce going through here, so that when people are starving because they can't afford wheat, that we can build roads so we can open up commerce for them so that they can start to get trade and level things out. And it's like, all of a sudden, like if you look at the United States, what's one of the big differentiating factors in the United States versus anywhere else in the world? Our roads. We have unbelievable, beautiful roads that go all over the place where we can deliver. I mean, Amazon, right? Like Amazon is a miracle. Like I can order something and there's a decent chance it will be on my doorstep by noon, right? But now all of a sudden you look at Afghanistan, where it's like the commerce was completely interrupted and there was no way for the commerce to move. And if there's no way for the commerce to move, there's no power, there's no pressure from the people against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to say, hey man, you're screwing with business. And you're screwing with business, but because there was no business. And it was depressingly little for the amount of money that was dumped into the war effort. I mean, think about Kabul. I mean, yeah, there were some buildings that were built into Kabul, but the road, remember the road around the backside of the airport?
Yeah.
It's like you needed a monster truck to be able to drive it because the road was so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, you're telling me we can't fix the road by the friggin' airport? But the road from the airport to the international hotel where all of the generals, congressmen, senators, and journalists were coming on was beautiful. Was beautiful.
Yeah, we used to have that, like that road from the Ariana to where we'd get everybody in Kabul International. And it's just like a regular highway, right? You had like Masood Circle going into the Ariana where the embassy was. But it's beautiful. It's like, well, Los Angeles isn't the greatest example, but it's like a Salt Lake City road, basically. Yeah. And then as soon as you got out, like as soon as you went out towards like KMTC or, you know, all the other places out there, it was fucked. Like you had to have a 4-wheel drive vehicle. One night, like, I can't remember if you were there. Like I was coming back from KMTC with my Terp, and we just so happened, we weren't part of the ambush. We just so happened we were in the ambush. Like it wasn't intentionally. I wasn't part of the actual ambush. So I just basically reversed out and like fucked off. You know, I was like, okay, ain't my ambush, you know, like I'm leaving. And I drove all the way. So like those of you that have never been to Kabul, it's like basically it's ringed by mountains. And then if you go out a certain road, there's like J-Bad Road is what we called it, but it was out towards Phoenix base. And then KMTC was basically on the northeast side of Kabul. So I was like driving through all those little like villages and shit out there trying to find my way back around the base. Yeah. And I couldn't find my way out. And more importantly,
prison.
I was like way out there. It was just me and my Terp. And he's like, you're going to die. You're taking us on a road where like, one, we're going to run out of gas, and two, we're going to fucking die. It's a bad part of town. But I'm like, I don't know, man. We're going to find our own way home. And finally, I just went back to Scorpion Base where the Rangers were. I like knocked on their gate and was like, "Hey, dudes, can I stay the night?" Like, it's a big, and they're like, "We're jocking up, we're going out," and I was like, "Cool, can I stay the night here?" Because I don't like you guys can go take care of that, but I mean, I'm just gonna hang out here.
I'm an army
cool.
of one.
Yeah,
so
I'm just gonna stay here. I'm just gonna chill out here, but it's that road right there, literally. Where those guys were like, and it was like no Americans actually died, and they killed a fuck ton of dudes. So it was easy night for those guys. That was like the one section of road between Phoenix Base and KMTC and the Ariana, and then the next day it was fine. Like they had a fucking full ambush out there that night, killed a bunch of dudes. Like they had Apaches coming in, they had all kinds of shit coming in, and it was completely fine the next day. You wouldn't even have known that there was anything going on out there.
Just like, another day.
But the road around the airport that we used to drive all the time, to your point, you couldn't get around that thing without a 4x4 vehicle for years, for like a decade.
And it's like, where did all my tax dollars go?
One night.
It's like remember the old blockhouse apartments that were built by the Russians?
Yeah.
I mean, the big section of blockhouse apartments, it was built by the Russians, and it's like, well, the Russians were building. So what are we doing?
What are we doing? Dude, I fell into one of those I fell into one of those like a shit trench one night.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were like me and a couple other guys were out doing something, and I like stepped out of the vehicle and went over the ledge and then sunk down into basically a creek of human shit, which was super fun for everybody because I had to get back in the vehicle and I fucking reeked like shit for the rest of the night.
We were going after some guy at Target one night, and so we were on the back side, and the Target was a tannery. So there was apartments, so the tannery was right here, like leather tannery, and then there were like apartments and stuff, and so our bad guy or target was in one of those things. So we came around the backside, and there's like this open lot. There's this big wall of the backside of the tannery and this open lot, right? And so we were looking for ways that we were going to put a ladder and go up over the wall there or something. So you step out, and we had one of the SEALs was attached to us, and he was wearing tennis shoes because sometimes these guys wear tennis shoes, and so he starts walking across the field, and there was a light dusting of snow, right? So he starts walking across this open lot, and he sinks down to just above his knee. And he's like, what the fuck? He pulls his foot out. Well, this tannery, all of the carcasses from the animals.
Oh, my God.
They were throwing that over the wall. And so he had all of this carcass rotting nastiness that went down his shoe and all over his leg. And he's like, oh my gosh. And we're all like, oh my gosh. And it was like the smell of unbelievable. So after we hit the target, right? Well, now we're loading up in the vehicles and coming home, and it's freezing outside. It was so incredibly putrid. Like everybody is like dry heaving. The windows are down. We're freezing to death. Everybody's dry heaving because this poor dude, like up to, his lower thigh is covered because now it's frozen.
Oh, right.
It's frozen to him, but it's still giving off this smell. And it was like, oh yeah. Classic moments.
Classic
moments. It was like Jason once told me we were out we were running ambushes early days of the war on
Jason Everman. He's the former bassist of Nirvana. He was on Rogan's show, but he's a good friend of Jeff and I's.
Yeah, he's best man at our wedding. He's a true warrior philosopher.
Yeah, he's an artisan of the craft.
Yeah, he's just a super fascinating guy. Super fascinating guy. And so Jason, we're out in Lawara. The fire base that was out there was named Tillman Fire Base. So it was right after Tillman had gotten killed. And so we were out there and we were running ambushes for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda that were coming across. And so anyways, we're in this old kind of defunct compound, you know, and there's a picture. So there's a picture of me that's kicking around social media, and I'm sitting there with a tomahawk.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
That hole is from the fight the night before. But so anyways, so Jason and I are sitting there talking, and so this is like, I don't know, 05 or something like that. And Jason's like, I'm going to write a book about soft. And I'm like, oh, yeah? And he goes, yeah. And the title's going to be Great Soft Bloopers. All the funny shit you never heard about. So
Like, I thought about the same thing as calling it Clowns in Action.
yeah,
Just like the dumb shit that we did, like just like the dumb shit that would go on. Because I think a lot of people have this idea that it was just such a kinetic environment and everything was going on all the time.
All
It's
the
like,
time.
bro, that's not like you would go through like weeks at times and there's like nothing going on. Like,
right. And then it would be night after night after night after night after night.
and it was just like in a lot of these places for us, because I was in a different side, like, you know, we would go out and we would be out, you know, not all night, but we'd be out like the majority of the night, and then we'd come back in, and then we'd like sleep till noon, and then we'd get back up, and then you would work out like sometimes 3 hours a day. Like after vehicle maintenance was done, and like after like recce, or you'd go link up with aviation and you'd go out and do like recce or whatever. Like you didn't really have a lot of work. You were just like just crushing yourself in the gym. And I was talking to somebody and they're like, well, yeah, I mean, was it just like stressful? I was like, bro, I was in the best shape of my life. And it's so funny because you remember, like I saw this meme years ago. It's so funny because it's like, it's two images of two guys. It's like one guy looks like he's like just got off the beach in like Iwo Jima, right? He's just like raggled and smoking a cigarette and fucking gaunt. And then the other guy is just like jacked and tan and has a fucking six pack. And it was like first group coming out of Thailand and fifth group coming out of Iraq. I was like, it's so true though. It's so true.
That's funny. You know, that's where that's kind of the story of Black Autumn, the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I had originally started writing because one of the trips that I was on, we were going out on assaults like every night, sometimes a couple times a night. And it was just over and over and over and over and over. And so we'd go out, we'd come back in about 3-4 o'clock in the morning, sleep for a couple hours. You'd get back and you're all jacked up on adrenaline and caffeine. So you're absolutely exhausted, like you're cross-eyed exhausted, but you can't sleep because you're still jacked up. And so you finally fall asleep, and then the in-ditch, you'd come knock on the door and it's like, Mr. Jeff, we're training. And it's like, oh, okay, you'd get up, go train with your dudes that were in training cycle, and then about 2 o'clock the target packets start coming down, and then you'd switch over to the mission cycle guys, start the planning process, and get ready to do it all over again. And so my brother, one of my brothers had told me that, and I have no idea if this is true or not, right? But the Jack Reacher novels,
Yeah.
he had told me that the guy that wrote them was in Vietnam, and that he had started writing as a way to decompress, and so to pressure relief. And
Right.
like I remember I was I was right outside of Kabul, and I was laying in my bunk, and I was so jacked up on caffeine from those stupid Rippets, and adrenaline because it'd been one of the exciting nights. And I was sitting there and I was like, I'm so tired and I can't sleep. And I remember my brother telling me, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try it. So I got up and I got on my computer and I started writing, and I was like, what am I going to write about? And I was like, I don't know, I'm going to write about, and you write about what you know, right?
Yeah.
So so I started writing about a special forces guy, surprise, in Afghanistan, surprise. But he's kind of like an Indiana Jones meets Flashman character. If
Yeah,
you've read
yeah,
the George
Flashman.
McDonald
Yeah,
Flashman.
yeah.
That's always kind of the anti-hero. So I'm sitting here typing,
Is it Flashman Cooley? Was that what it
No,
was?
Harry Flashman.
Oh,
So by George McDonald Fraser.
Yeah.
Completely irreverent thing. He's the anti-hero, but it's a fan. And the first Flashman's in Afghanistan. And I was sitting there, and I remember sitting there typing and writing about this guy, and I was laughing about it. And pretty soon I looked at the clock, and it'd been like an hour and a half or something. I was like, oh, slept like a baby. And then I started doing it. So anyways, I got like 200, 300 pages into this. Still hasn't been published, right? So fast forward, Jason and I were having these conversations about how do you think the world could fall? And
Yeah, right.
fall, and I was like, oh, probably bourbon was involved. And I was like, I'll tell you how I think it's going to fall. And then at one point, I think it was him, was like, man, this would make a great novel. And I was like, well, we should do it. And he's like, blah, blah, blah. And so I gave him the transcript for this character. And I was like, well, here, read this manuscript.
Right.
And it's full of like syntax errors and misspellings and stuff. And I was like, and he read it and he's like, oh my gosh, we could do this. And I was like, well, let's do it. And then that in Black Autumn was, the book was born, and now fast forward, we got a movie coming out. But
yeah, like when's the movie actually drop? Because I know the trailer's
December
out.
20th.
That's right.
So the premieres are coming up here in a couple of weeks, and then the big release is
Where's it premiering?
they're doing an L.A., Salt Lake, and Tennessee. I think in Nashville,
right,
is where they're doing it, and then it gets released. We're like, and then we're gonna have. We rented a theater. I think you're coming, and we'll watch it and stuff. And so Jason, it's an adaptation from the Black Autumn series, and Jason was the main writer on that. He did a great job. He did.
Yeah.
Like I watched it. I was a little truth be told, forgive me, Father, for my sin. And I was a little bit. I had some trepidation because Jason loves the drama, and so there's some trepidation. I watched it, and there were a couple moments where I was just like, oh my gosh, he's so captured that so well. And then Bailey, who plays like the Jeff character, is because Black Autumn, when we wrote it, it's like all the characters were people we knew.
Yeah, it was like JT, me, you, like
Logan.
Everybody's in it.
Everybody's in it, right? Yeah. And then when we, but the book was like 2,000 pages long. So when we sent it to the editor, they were like, "That's great. You're not Stephen King with The Stand. Nobody's going to read a post-apocalyptic book this 2000." So we edited it down, and that's where the novellas came from. And then Black Autumn was the one that went out. Well, we sent it back to because everybody was still in name, right? So we sent that back to the publisher, and they're like, "This is awesome. We can do this." And we're like, "Okay, we've just got a little bit more editing to do, and then we'll be good," because we want to go through and change all the names, right? And they're like, No, we like it the way that it is. You can't change anything because we're going to print, and there were some timelines and stuff. So Jason and I kind of looked at each other, and he's like, "What do you think?" And I was like, 100 people are going to read this thing. Who cares?
Yeah,
Jeff
100.
Jeff character's the main character, and I'm all fucked up in the book, and so is Jason, and and your character's kind of the mediator. And
which is so weird,
and and so it was released, and then geez, we've sold. I mean, last check about a year ago, over 500,000 copies at this point.
That's crazy, man.
And so, so I guess more than 100 people bought it. Yeah, more. But I mean that's Jason. I mean, he's the powerhouse behind that. But anyways, that came from like Afghanistan, like as a way to decompress, is like writing about this special force again. Maybe someday I'll release that sci-fi novel because I thought it was pretty clever. But
because wasn't it the original concept? I think I remember us talking about it where it was like an ODA that was out in the middle of nowhere, and they come across like a mine or something like that. Was it?
Yeah. You remember?
Yeah.
So he's on a man. I get pumped when I talk because it was so much fun. It was so cathartic when I was writing it. So he's on he's the SF guy. He's the team sergeant. He's done multiple tours, right? And his name is Wayne, Wayne Lanou. I'd played with different names, but that was, I don't know if you remember, Wayne Lanou was my name. That was my
That's right.
alias
That's
undercover
right.
name in DEA.
Yeah.
And I still have a picture of my driver's license, my fake driver's license, where it's Wayne Lanou.
Which is so funny. Wayne Grow, Wayne Lanou. Yeah, it's so funny.
And Lanou, for you guys that don't know, when you were working cases against bandits, if you didn't know what the last name was, it was LKU, Lanou. So my name was Wayne Lanou, last name unknown.
Right.
And the address on the driver's license is like the 7-Eleven that was, about a mile or so from my actual house. And so here's this guy, he's a special forces guy. He's done multiple tours in Afghanistan, and he starts realizing, he's like, this war's bullshit. I'm going to start making money. And so it's like, so he starts pulling in satellite imagery and looking for treasures. And then he kind of crafts his team of like-minded other SF dudes. And it's like, and then he goes off to and it's an actual place called the Belly Button that was in Helmand Province. Yep. And like nobody had ever gone. And it was like this mountain that was surrounded. It was like a mountain, but it was like a huge volcano is the only way to describe it. And there's like a village, and that village has been in there for thousands of years, and there's only one way in and one way out. Well, I shrunk that down, and that was going to be the Temple of Gold, and then they all go in there, and it's a zombie outbreak, and then Wayne is the only lone survivor that comes out of there, and he E&Es, and he gets Section 8 out of the army because he's talking about a zombie apocalypse that wiped out his team, and they're like, okay, crazy dude, you're out. And then he goes to work for a corporation, and monsters are real, and man, that was so much fun. I need to revisit that.
Yeah, because I think you actually let me read that back in the day. I can't remember
if you remember, because there was there were the 7 dwarves.
Yes, that's right.
You most assuredly read it. Yeah.
It's so funny, man, because like you and I have done so much together over the last 20 years.
Dude, I completely forgot I was going to bring a picture. Oh my gosh, I knew I forgot something when I left. Not to cut you off, bro. So we're in the Philippines, and 2002, which is where the skull symbol and all that.
It's where this skull. I mean, we modified
the tomahawk
it.
and the boon. So. And I have a picture of you. So in the Philippines, there was this scorpion that was deadly, and it was this little black scorpion. And I have a picture of you with your bare foot, where you had your foot in your boot all day.
All week. I didn't take my boots off because we were on patrol, and I was sleeping in that tree. And I had put my boot back on, and I wasn't wearing socks, and I stepped on it perfectly.
Yes.
And it folded the stinger down under the body.
Get stung.
I didn't get stung.
Yeah, and I've got a picture of you when you realized
it was on my bottom of my foot. That was where I had I remember I had we found those baby cobras.
Yeah,
and I had a baby
cobra, and then it got out, and it was like, and you're like, has anybody seen my pet cobra?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was like, these are all the things I never thought I would say in my life. And one was, has anybody seen my pet cobra? in our little sleeping area.
Bloopers.
Yeah. That was like, God, man, that was like so much fun because we got I was like the first time we got shot at by those farmers. And I told the story before where I was like pissing. It was me and Strand. And like, we were down in this little like piece of, it's like a little trench, and we were out on patrol doing something, and I was taking a piss, and the brush started popping around me, and just like sporadically, it wasn't anything, but I didn't know what it was. I was like, what's going on? And Steve like dropped to the ground, and then I'm like standing there, but then I drop. I'm like, I think somebody's shooting at us. And that was basically the end. That was it, right? And then the Filipinos went and rolled them up, and that was the end. But I got this great picture of me. We caught a boa in a trap. So I'm like standing there in like my ranger panties, and I've got this giant boa I'm holding up. And meanwhile, I have like 2 baby pet cobras in an aquarium. Like we got all this crazy shit going on. It was like, we rented this hotel in Angeles City. We got the whole top floor, and I jumped off, and in the center of this like square, there's a pool, and I jumped off the second floor into the pool. It was so crazy. And I hit my foot on the side of the pool in my way in, and fucking rolled my ankle. It was like the size of a basketball. Oh, God, man, that was such a fun trip. There was one of the guys on the team that was like a little bit rotund, and I was like, You look like a pillow that had a piece of 550 cord tied around his waist, and he wanted to fight so bad. It's just my mouth. My mouth gets me in so much fucking trouble, man. Like Jeff and I had done so like we did so much stuff together where like back in the day.
You introduced me to whitewater kayaking.
Yeah.
And I remember going out with Sam Drivo and
dude. So Jeff and I, like, we came back from Iraq on the first time, and I took him whitewater kayaking in Hood, and we went down this the White Salmon just south of Mount Hood. North of Hood. So to paint
the picture, he talks me into buying a kayak. It was a samurai kayak. Well, I weigh about 220 pounds, right? And so the samurai kayak is built for somebody that's like 170 pounds.
Like my size.
And I can't, and it's like a playboat, and I can't kayak. I'm just beginning, right? So I've kind of set the stage. So,
and we go down, and it's south of Adams, north of Hood. It's called the White Salmon. It's just a small stretch of white water, but it's fairly technical. Jeff's never done anything. And he is swimming almost the entire time. Like he's under the boat, he's swimming, and like lost his paddle. Yeah, and
I got really good at self-recovery. And the water,
it's freezing. Like, it's right off the mountain.
It's like 38 degrees.
Yeah. And
we had that dude that was coming down with us.
Yeah, there's a dude with us. And so Jeff's like swimming the entire time, and I'm just like kayaking, and I'm like doing my thing coming down. And then we get down to the takeout, and Jeff's been in the water the entire time. Well, I'm like, dude, this guy's a scuba guy. Fuck him. You know, he knows how to do this. And I roll at the bottom. I roll and flip over. For the first time, I go in the water and then roll over. I'm like, ooh, ice cream headache. That's cold. And Jeff's like, fuck you, man.
I've been in the water all day.
Yeah, I've been in the water all day. And I'm like, ooh, that is cold, Jeff. You're not joking. That's super cold water.
Yeah, I got rid of that boat.
Dude.
Evan was like, you probably should get a different boat.
Yeah.
I was like, really?
Maybe not the best instructor. I probably shouldn't have been teaching anybody. We had
and then we linked up with Sam Drivo and did that trip with him. He was amazing.
Oh, dude, he's such a good guy. I haven't talked to that guy forever. We did this company Ready Man back in the day. And when we first got back, I guess it was like 13. 14 is when,
yeah.
Yeah, so 14, when we started 15, that.
Because we were out in Colorado there for about a year.
I was there because I was going back and forth to Afghanistan. I was also still working that training gig in Colorado. And then we came out here. And so Jeff and I used to do this, together. We used to do that survival company. And that was early on, but when we were talking about CQB earlier, we would put civilians through like basically one-man home defense stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I want to like recall this because you'd see all these guys that were competitive shooters and that had some type of familiarity with pistols, and then you'd put them into a scenario and they would just completely fall apart.
Yeah.
And that to me was very eye-opening because we had been doing this stuff for so long, and we just kind of, at least for me, I felt like some of this stuff is not that difficult, but even just a small amount of pressure would just completely blow holes in people's home defense programs. They'd be like, oh God, man, you need more time in the range isn't going to help you. You need to like be in sim scenarios all the time.
Yeah. And practice in your house.
Yeah.
Yeah. The statistical probability of threat of getting in a gunfight, maybe it's out on the street somewhere or something. Avoid. But if it's going to happen, it's decent chance, call it 50-50, right? Your house. Yeah. Well, train in your house, right?
Yeah.
Just remove that variable right off and learn all the angles. Yeah, I remember trying to get people is like, train in your own house, man. Go buy an airsoft pistol. It costs you a penny for every 100 shots, and and just set up traps in your own house.
Yeah, we did stuff early on that I still used with my kids, like for forever. Like teach them on an airsoft, and then transition them to a BB gun, and then transition them to a real gun, and then you just crawl, walk, run. All of those like little pieces that you pick up along the way, like training guys, you can still implement those in your daily life with your kids. Like my girls have shot a lot. Like my oldest Nara, she's already shot out to 1,000.
Wow.
So every year my goal was to, okay, if you're 5, 6, 7, it's like 500, 600, 700 and stretch them out. Well, when she was 8, she shot out to $1,000 with like a 7mm, AI precision rifle. And I was like, okay, well, we got a few years then. You can just keep working on it. But she's great. She can shoot to a precision like really well. And she has no idea what she's done. She has there's no way she even talks about that with her friends. She's like, oh, I've shot out to 1,000. She wouldn't have a clue. She's just like, yeah,
normal.
I've been shooting with my dad a lot, and this is just completely normalized. They have like these high-powered pellet guns with the air tanks on them, and they can shoot the shit out of stuff with that. They're so good.
Think about the implied task that's there, right? So you've got the actual activity, right, of shooting. But now think about to accurately shoot all of those implied tasks that are there. You've got to modulate, and you've got to be able to regulate your nervous system. You've got to be able to control your breathing. You have to be able to control your focus on your brain and not get distracted. You have to be able to listen to instruction from the person that's helping you. You have to be aware of your surroundings because know what's in the front, back, left, and right of your target when you're shooting. So you have all of these implied tasks, and it doesn't have to just be shooting, but you have all of these implied tasks that now, through a fun activity with, daddy-daughter, right? You've instilled that in your child. It's like, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be, right?
That's the way it's supposed to be.
And it doesn't have to be shooting. It can be anything, but it's like, but look at, it's like if we had more of that, like we were talking about Boy Scouts, the Scouts, Scouting America, whatever they're called now. If we had more of that, gosh, we wouldn't be dealing with a lot of what we're dealing with now, probably most of it.
Yeah, fractions of it. It's during COVID, I was teaching her low-vis Overwatch, and people were like, what's that? I was like, oh, she would have to shoot from inside the vehicle, like pop the hood. And then I put lasers on their suppressed 22s. So they're shooting out to distance with lasers. Then I'd take them out at night with NVGs and lasers on their suppressed 22s. And we'd go hunt coyotes. And I was talking to somebody about it. I was like, my kids have shot more under NVGs and lasers than 99% of the men out there that probably own NVGs. And they don't know because it's just like a little bolt action 22. They can't load more than one round at a time. And you can see, that's the other thing, at night you can always see where their muzzles are because you just keep their lasers on and say, don't point them in anybody's eyes, but you can keep them pointed downrange. You know exactly where it's at. So you take all those transferable skills that we picked up along the way, and then you throw that into fun. And so now my kids are like cruising around, in Texas at 10:30 at night with night vision goggles, suppressed 22s, hunting coyotes. Most guys, when I talk to my neighbors, like regular civilians, I'm like, oh, no, my kids have hunted under NVGs. And they're like, I would love to do that. Like, could you take me? Like, it's just fun. Just little fun things that you pick up along the way with your kids, man. Like you got 3, so you got 2 boys and a girl. And like, are you guys like actively, you guys have to be like shooting? Well,
yeah. So funny enough, my oldest, he's a natural with a rifle. Like we had shot like BB guns and stuff, and probably not as much as we should, but then he went for his rifle merit badge and scouts, and he was stacking rounds in the target, and I was like, okay. And then he picked up a shotgun for his shotgun merit badge because you have to shoot skeet. And he missed passing the test. And the test is legit. Anybody who knows scouts, like shooting with the, they shoot 22s and then they shoot the shotgun. It's a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge. Most of them shoot 20 gauge. It's legit. It's not it's known in scouting that that's a hard merit badge. I don't think I even got that merit badge. And so here he picks up a 22. It wasn't the first time he had shot, but pretty close. And he's stacking rounds. So it's like, okay, he's a natural. And then he picks up a shotgun and he missed passing the requirements by one clay pigeon. And it was like, where did this come from? And then the next time out, he shot it and he was just fine. And it's funniest because he's like my analytical one.
Right.
So like to put that into perspective, like if I can dad brag here a little bit, he's 12 and he has done microeconomics 101 college level,
right?
Microeconomics 101, macroeconomics 101, world history 101. He's working on poli-sci 101. All of these are college credit classes.
And he's 12.
Yeah. I mean, he's a voracious reader. Like he puts me to shame. He he loves Sanderson's books and he just finished a 1,500 page novel that and he's started on the second. Yeah. So he's kind of my intellectual one. And then, and then the next one down is he's like, I was unbelievably proud and it broke my heart. Like a year or so ago, he said, "Dad, I want to be like you and be a Green Beret." And part of me was like, I was so proud. And part of me was like, it broke my heart, And so now he's like taken, he's learning how to do Muay Thai and all of that stuff. So yeah, but shooting there's so many implied stuff that's there and you can get there, lots of roads to getting there. But that's that time with parents. I think the national average for quality time with parents and kids, I think the national average, you know what the national average is?
Probably 3 hours a week.
It's about 20 minutes a day.
Oh yeah,
about 20 minutes a day. So you're not too far off.
Yeah,
which is
crazy.
if you think about it, and it's like if they and if kids are looking to parents as whatever it's like human beings will find a role model.
Yes,
it's in our DNA, right? That's the whole influencers because we're looking for the people. Back in the day, the influencer was the one, the celebrity, the influencer was the great hunter that was bringing food to the tribe and was protecting us from the saber-toothed tiger or from the monsters that were in the shadows. And then if all of a sudden, like mom and dad are gone because they're gone for whatever reason, the DNA will start pushing those young minds to find those influencers and celebrities and other places. And back to our original thing is like the youth of today are all fucked up, and it's like, yeah, but what are you doing about it? Are you one of the ones that it's only 20 minutes a day with your kids and it's like, I got it, there's job and all of that other stuff that's there, but really, are you it's like we can't blame the kids for something that we've done. It's the team leader that leaves the team, and it's like, and if he leaves the team and he's not a good leader, it's not his fault. It was our fault on the team because we didn't mentor and raise him up to be a good adult when he goes off and becomes general or something like that. And the reality is we can look at some of the current field grades that we have that are running around that are probably going to be jobless here pretty quickly. that it's like, what happened, and if they came from a team that was, not more interested in X versus development, well, this is what you end up with.
What are you seeing now? Because I mean, I know you and Hugh are working on the program, and how long have you guys been doing this? And then like, what are you seeing? Because I know you've written a couple different manuals around that. Like,
4, yeah. We've got 2 more on the way. Yeah. So Hugh, Hugh, Hugh Vale. So we've got Mustang Medicine. We started 3 years ago. We've done 20 retreats at this point, and it's a personal wellness, personal development. Just it's a philosophy, right? And at the pinnacle of that philosophy is personal sovereignty, right? Going back to our discussion about majority of people just want to be left alone. Well, really, that's sovereignty. So, and so it's not Special Forces assessment selection. It's not Navy SEAL Hell Week. It's not getting in the cold water and somebody telling you that you need to be there longer. It was like, we don't do that because that's a violation of sovereignty. We take sovereignty. So we do practices that are there that are hard. So we do hard things, but you opt in, and you can opt in whether your toes in there or your whole thing. So the example I like to tell people is by the letter of the law, a cold plunge is up to your collarbone.
Sure.
It's 3.5 minutes and blah, 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 blah. Well, like my sister, she came to one of the retreats and she had never cold plunged before. And we talk about, the physical, psychological, and emotional component of why cold plunging is so important. And we teach that in the thing. But she came in and the cold plunge to her was to her knees. And that was it. And we're like, that's okay. Listen to your body. Be your own advocate. If more people were their own advocate and they advocated for themselves, which really is sovereignty, then we would have far less medical problems that we have today. And so it was like, do that. There was nobody saying you can do it, get in the water.
Right.
And even, I'll illustrate another point is like Hugh at one point was said, what would be really cool is if we had everybody line up and they held hands, and then because we've got this pond, we hold it at a ranch and it's a beautiful scenery. And in the wintertime, we're breaking the ice on the pond. So there's a little bit of a mental game that you have to play there a little bit. And Hugh was like, we should hold hands and all walk into the water. And I was like, Hugh, I don't like that. He's like, why? And I said, because you're quite possibly violating somebody's sovereignty. You are fawning them in because there's flight, fight, freeze, fawn. Mob mentality, right? People lose their ability to choose for themselves. Well, that's a high stress response. And it was like, we don't want people to fawn. That's it. We don't want them. It's like, no, if we're holding hands and we're walking into the water, albeit it could be very powerful for some people, but we're quite possibly violating the sovereignty of other people. And Hugh, to his credit, was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Yeah, we don't want to do that. And so at the retreat, we get everything from, we had a CEO that owned 15 McDonald's down in Las Vegas. He came to us and was like, I heard about you guys and I just want to be better. We've gotten sales teams all the way down to soccer moms. We've had Navy SEALs and Green Berets. We've had veterans and first responders. We've gotten, people, we've had people that were suicidal that have come to us that they want to change. We're not an intervention. We are a place that people can come to be better, to understand self and be better. We're not a place to yank you out of to force you into doing something that you don't want to do. We have people that come to us and it's like, my nephew is, addicted to whatever, he needs an intervention. Can I send him to you? And we're like, we're probably not the right place for that. Once he gets to the point where he's trying and he wants to change, he or she want to change, they're on the journey, they're not really sure where to go, and they're looking for a philosophy for life and how to do that, then we're a really good place to go. And then what we do is we teach people tools to regulate their nervous system. We do a variety of practices, cold plunge, heat, yoga, holotropic breathing, where you use these tools to go through the practices. And the practices really are physical, psychological, emotional, but it's also a hormetic practice, which is just a fancy way of saying stress on the cell to make you better and stronger. And then we encourage people, it's like, okay, here's all the books, and we go through the books while we're in the retreat over the 3.5 days, 4 days. And it's like, take this home and teach this to your friends and family. We don't have any secrets or anything like that. Some of the retreats are like, you can't tell other people about it. And we're like, tell everybody about it. As a matter of fact, we give our curriculum away to other places because we don't need just one Mustang medicine. We need 1,000 of these if we want to help heal everything that's going on with diet, the physical and the psychological and emotional. Because we teach a bunch of that stuff during the week and why it's important and how it all ties together. And then consequently, we've had great success. We've got first responders and veterans and soccer moms, and we have therapists that come to us to learn more. And and we're constantly kind of evolving and getting better. And we ourselves as the facilitators, I'll stand up and I'll give my class and my spiel. And then I sit down, I get my notebook, my workbook out, and I start taking notes. And so there's something that sets us apart from other places. And everything's great, right? But what we do is we give people tools that they can take home and practice. So it's not a big dopamine dump that has that place. But then we also sit down and I'll listen to Hugh's class. So I can legitimately say I have been through 20 rewilding. It's called Mustang Medicine, the rewilding. I can legitimately say I've been through 20 rewildings because I sit down and then Robin, my wife, will get up and she'll give her, and I'm taking notes. And every single time I'm like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of it like that way. And it's all about self-improvement and getting better and better and better. It's like, I think you probably remember my first team sergeant, Doug Peshtel.
Oh, yeah.
Phenomenal individual. He was like one of the first Delta dudes. He was on the Iran hostage rescue attempt back in the, when Iran was still holding the embassy hostages, the American hostages. And he told me one thing. He's a phenomenal team sergeant. And he told me one thing. He said, Jeff, there is no stasis. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're either learning or you're forgetting. This thing of maintaining, he's like, it's a myth. And I held that my entire life, where it was just like, oh, that means I've got to constantly work on self so that I can limit, and it's Shinseiko through the olive branch and the Lexus, the Japanese method of like limit the amount of waste, improve the productivity. Well, that's getting better or getting worse. That's getting smarter or getting worse. And so for us with the retreat now is different than the first ones because we've learned and evolved and implemented new classes. And like our workbook, we're working on version 7 of the workbook right now that we go through, just simply because we're getting better and we're constantly learning.
Yeah, 7 books in 3 years. Yeah, I think that's interesting because you have multiple patents now, multiple books, and you're not just speaking from an operator's perspective. I think you've spent the last couple of years basically going back to school as a 50 years old.
Yeah, so I went back to nursing school at 50.
Yeah.
And now I have my master's degree in nursing, and I'm getting my master's in psychology, and then I go back to nursing school for my nurse practitioner here in a couple of months.
Hey, so a lot of guys they'll ping me and they'll talk about this transition out of military service, how they're trying to find this professional footing and their new identity, and they're going through this existential crisis in their life. Part of the thing that I think is interesting from you is you've lived multiple different lives. You've lived, undercover agent, undercover DEA agent, to Green Beret, to, commando, to, entrepreneur, to nurse. And one of the things I truly respect about you is you're constantly evolving. But I don't know if from an individual motivation perspective, a lot of guys they'll go, I'm stuck. I'm like, well, get yourself unstuck. How do you get yourself unstuck? Because you're always moving, you're always doing other shit. But how are you getting yourself unstuck? Like, what is it that's working for you?
It's well, we used to teach this, right? Mm-hmm. So we used to teach people situational awareness, and The 2 points you're most vulnerable to attack, right, of being kidnapped or ambushed, is when you leave your house or return to your house, or when you leave your place of work or you return to your place of work. The 2 most probable places that you can get hit. Well, you can build up the security on that. So very rarely does anybody get taken in their house unless it's like Delta Force kicking in your door, or at your work unless it's Delta Force kicking around your door. So if it's the cartel or something, they've got to grab you someplace between A and B or B and A. Well, the problem with most human beings is they take the same route to and from work every single day. So it's Kim's games, right? So we tell people it's like vary your routes going to work. You remember these in the classes, vary your routes going to work. And while you're varying your routes going to work, increase your situational awareness and try to figure out new things that you didn't know about or you hadn't noticed along the way. So that's Kim's games, right? Identifying different stuff that snipers do from Kipling. Well, and then all of a sudden, the side effect of that is you figure out, you're like, man, my life is actually way more better because now I'm noticing things that I had not noticed. Because we now know human beings, 95% of what goes through our brain is redundant shit that went through it yesterday and the day before and the week before, the month before, the decade before. And we're not changing. So if you're stuck in a rut, the way to change that is because we have thoughts, right? Thoughts drive biochemicals, drive emotions, drive behavior. Okay, we know this from the chemistry of the brain. So if I want to change the outcome of my behavior, I have to change my thoughts that changes my biochemicals. So I change my behavior so that I can change my thoughts, so I can change my biochemicals, that then changes my emotions, that then changes my behavior out of the outcome. Well, how do I do that? Well, I do that because I have to become aware. And when I become aware, I can make reasonable and rational decisions that feel good and right. And I mentioned this before, right? So I make reasonable and rational decisions that feel good and right. And that's how I change my behavior that ultimately changes the way that I think, that changes my biochemicals, my emotions, that ultimately I get a positive behavior at the end of that. So for me, because, and one of the key ingredients to that recipe is curiosity, right? So curiosity means that I'm going to look at stuff and it's like, I wonder if, and why is that? The same thing that we used to do in CQB. Why is that the best method?
Right.
Prove it to me. Prove it to me. Prove it to me that taking moving in and moving 2 corners to the far corner wall, prove it to me that makes sense. Because the reality is it doesn't make sense if the ranger that comes in number 2 man or number 4 man comes in and he has a saw and all of a sudden he's gone cyclic and I'm on the other side of the room.
Right.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So prove to me, and he's got green tips. So no amount of armor that I'm
Doesn't
wearing
matter.
is gonna help me. Prove it to me that works. And so now it's that curiosity where I look at it and I go, okay, why is this? And then really, if you look at what is courage, right? Courage is being scared, but doing it anyways. Well, guess what? When I went to nursing school, was I scared? You got him right. I was scared. Like I was coming up with it was like I wanted to do it, but I was coming up with every excuse that I could think of. And I've got a wonderful wife that supports me. And I was like, I want to go back to school, but but I'm gonna have to do some long hours. And she was like, you work 15 hours a day now anyways. So
Why does it matter?
and I was like, well, I'm gonna have to drive to the school. And she was like, the school is 10 minutes away and it's COVID, so it's gonna be online. And I was like, well, it's gonna cost money. And she was like, the VA will pay for it. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to nursing school. And then I went to nursing school, and obviously there's a bunch of trepidation, right? And so it's like, oh, what is this going to be like? It was unbelievably cathartic because I was going to learn because I just wanted to learn. And then since then, it has set me on the path of where I'm at now, where I'm like, oh my gosh, my life is way better now than it was before that because I've learned so much. And the reality is, and that's the story of Mustang Medicine, right? I had just finished nursing school, like literally that week. I had just finished nursing school. And Hugh called me and he said, hey, man, I'm thinking about doing a retreat, a wellness retreat. Will you come down and teach a class? And I was like, yeah, what do you want me to teach a class on? He's like, I want you to teach a class on the wise warrior avoids the battle. Sun Tzu, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, was like, yeah, I can do that. Well, I'd always wanted to go back through and do a self-audit, like what you were talking about, do a self-audit and figure out. I spent all of that time in the war actively doing direct action missions, 13 years, almost 8 years on the ground doing that stuff. What contributed to me having all of my fingers and toes and most of my marbles between my ears? I don't have PTSD. God bless the people that do. I don't. What contributed to that? So I went back and I started, because I'm fresh out of the science, right? And so I went back and started doing a self-audit. And I realized, so there's this big joke in nursing. It's that nursing exams are trick questions followed by a bunch of trick answers. And like the big joke is like, you know, what is the answer to this question? Is it potassium, or potassium? Well, you chose the wrong potassium because this S should be this S and not and that's just so when you take the NCLEX, which is the national board exam for your licensure, it's a very difficult test. You don't know how long it could be a little over an hour. It could be, I think, up to 4 hours because it's a progressive test and you don't know. And so the test varies. So I may take the test and it may be 100 questions. Somebody else may take the test and it may be 300 questions. So you've got to, and imagine taking a test, trick answers, trick questions, trick answers for 3. It's not easy. And so I passed everything, right? I finished nursing school with honors, whatever that means. And so I went back and I started doing a self-audit. And then I realized I had like this little ritual that I used to do before I took nursing exams. And it was an eye thing and counting my fingers and stuff. And you've probably seen me do some of this stuff. Yeah. Well, I was like, oh my gosh, that is the same exact thing that I used to do before I'd go out on assaults at night. And so then I started going, well, what was I doing? Because I knew why I was doing it when I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Rapid eye movement, left and right, saccade movement, because I'm looking for targets, right? But the reality is, no, that's part of it. The reality is, and that's just one of the things, is because when you're shooting plates, the eyes drive the gun doesn't drive the eyes. Same thing. So you're moving left and right, looking for targets and focusing and getting on the depth perception. But the reality of what you're doing is when you do that prior to, you're activating the 12 cranial nerves and you're balancing the brain. And so I went back through and I started auditing all these things that I was doing, like counting the fingers back and forth and following my finger and depth perception exercise, a little exercise that I used to do, and then setting my intention. I had no idea what setting intention was back then, but then realized that now in the wellness space, it was like, oh my gosh, I was regulating my nervous system. That's what I was doing. And so there's a story that I tell and at the beginning of my class where we were on an assault. And so, you know, we used to do these different assaults where it was like sometimes we'd come in by truck, sometimes we'd come in by helicopter. So this one was a truck. We were dropping the trucks off of VDO. And then we had to walk down a trail. And so what was different about this assault was the target. So there were some Al-Qaeda guys in this target, and it was a capture or kill mission. And the guys that were in this, compound were on the edge of this chasm. It was a ravine, but the ravine was like 100 feet deep, 150 feet deep, and it was quite steep on the ones on the thing. So we'd have to park the trucks and then follow a trail down to where the ravine petered out, and then follow it back up to where the target was. Well, at the end of the ravine, there was a little village that was there. So we'd have to go through the village, and there were mountains on the one side. So you had to go through the village because there was big mountains over here. And then we'd follow that trail up, and we'd set up, and then this compound is literally on the edge of this deep ravine. So we're like, okay. I was the ground force commander, and so we're moving in. We had a force of, I don't know, it was like 75 of us or something. So it's about 2:00 in the morning. We unass the trucks, we VDO, and we're walking down, night vision, and everything is like green and shadows and stuff like that. So we walk down to the end of the ravine, and then we kind of button hook back to start following the ravine back up to where the target was, and we're going through the village. and the village is dead quiet, and it's like 2:00 in the morning, cognitive bias, right? So you start justifying everything in your head. No lights, no dogs barking, no goats baying, no nothing. The village was dead. And it was like, okay, well, it's 2:00 in the morning. Of course it's dead.
Right.
But the spidey sense is tingling, right? Hairs on the back of my neck. I'm like, something's not right. So we make it through the village. We move like another probably 200 meters, and we're up on this kind of on a hill, and then down from the hill to our direct right is this compound. So it's like, so we get there, we get to our set point. It's like, okay, send in the containment team. So containment moves down to the target, and they start putting up the ladders. Well, as I'm sitting here watching containment move down, I've got MVGs. I'm looking at the hill to my left. I'm looking at my interpreter. I'm looking back at my guys, and I keep looking at this hill. Well, on the hill, there's this big boulder, right? Sitting on the hill. So I'm looking at this boulder. I'm looking at the hill. I'm looking at containment moving down, looking at my guys, and I keep looking at this boulder. Now, this boulder is like 20 meters away, maybe 15 meters away. And at one point, I'm looking at this boulder, and the boulder reaches up and moves the blanket from his face. Because remember, everything's just shadows, right? Under MVGs. You can't tell it's a boulder. And so now my brain is trying to catch up. The OODA loop, right? OODA loop. My brain is trying to catch up, and I'm like, that boulder's not a boulder. That boulder's a dude. And I asked my terp, I'm like, is that a man? He's like, yes, sir. Well, the dude stands up. He's got a rifle. So now all of a sudden, long story short, we're in an ambush.
Right.
So we kick it off. Dude that was supposed to kick off the ambush didn't realize. We're ninjaing in the middle of the night, and he just flat out didn't realize. So gunfight kicks off, right? So gunfight's down in the compound, gunfight with this guy right here. So after everything finishes, so the Al-Qaeda dude that we're supposed to capture was actually a few Al-Qaeda dudes, and we killed 2 of them. And so now all of a sudden, like, explosions have been going off and gunshots and everything else that you can imagine. It's like the 4th of July on the final finale. Well, that's all settled, and we're sitting in the middle of the compound, and it's me and like 4 of my peers that are other American advisors. Everybody else is Afghans. And it's like, well, what are we going to do? And so I'm like, okay, what do you guys think? And they're like, well, we have to go back through the village. Next guy, well, we have to go back through the village. And I was like, next guy, we got to go back through the village. And I'm just in the back of my head, I'm like, we can't go back through that village. And so I was like, why can't we go through the ravine? And so they're talking to the dude whose compound we had and stuff. He's like, there's no way out of that ravine. So it's like, we've got to go back through this village. And just in the back of my head, I'm like, no. I was like, okay, we're going to go into the ravine. And so now the Americans are like, we can't go through the ravine. There's no way out. There's no way down. There's no way out. And I was like, I don't know. We've got ladders. We've got straps. We'll manage. And mind you, we've got an assault force. It's now it's like 3:00 in the morning. Right. It's pitch fucking black. And so I'm like, no, let's go into the ravine. So because I was the ground force commander, I had the final say, and they're like, okay. So we go down into this ravine, and we're crawling. There's cliffs, and so little short cliffs, but we crawl down there. Imagine doing this in the middle of the night. We're hauling bodies with us because we had to take the bodies off. One of the SEALs, at one point, they're lowering one of the bodies down, and like all of the blood and guts spilled down like the front and back of this SEAL, and he's covered in offal, for lack of a better term. And so we get to the bottom, and the Americans are really happy with Jeff at this point.
Yeah, super stoked.
And so one of the guys starts yelling at me, where there's a little creek at the bottom. One of the guys starts yelling at me, and I'm just like, we'll figure it out when we get back. We're down here now. Let's just get out of here. So we're using the assault ladders to get up the side. We're pulling slings off of rifles so that we can pull guys up. We get up to the other side of this. We get our way out of there. It took us a couple hours. We get up to the other side. We load up on the trucks. Nothing happens. Everybody gets through. It's fine. And we start driving home. Well, the radio is really quiet on the way home. Really quiet. And I'm kind of like, okay, this is going to be brutal. So we get back to base. Nothing happens, right? We get back to base. First thing you do when you get back to base is is drop your kit, make sure your kit's ready to go, because we'd have targets that would pop up. Make sure your kit's ready to go, get out there, get the vehicles, refuel the vehicles, make sure the vehicles are ready to go. As soon as all of that's done or taken care of or in process, all of the Americans, we'd go into the TOC, the operations center, and we'd do an after-action report. So I finished getting my kit, and I'd be lying if I say I wasn't moving slow. and I walk into the TOC, right? And people, I can hear kind of the jibber jabber, and as soon as I walk in, it gets quiet. And I'm like bracing myself because I know I'm going to get both barrels from my peers, right? So I sit down, and about that time, the SIGINT guy comes in, and the signal intelligence guy. Well, the SIGINT guy was the guy we had Reaper was flying above for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, that they could watch the battlefield for us and give us early warning of problems. So the SIGINT guy starts talking to one of the advisors, and he says, "Stop." He's like, "You need to tell everybody what you just told me." So he goes, "Hey, how did you guys know not to go through that village?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "How did you guys know not to go back through that village?" It's like, "We were calling you on the radio, but we had lost comms, and we were calling to tell you they were digging in emplacements in that village with explosives and machine guns. It was like, if you'd have gone back through that village, you wouldn't have made it." And they were like, "We didn't know. Jeff did." And I equate that to, we warm up before we go to the gym and exercise. Why don't we warm up the brain and the emotions prior to what could be a stressful event? Well, because my little ritual from the nursing exams that I realized was the very same ritual that I used to do prior to going out on missions quite probably saved our lives. Because when everybody else, because special operations guys, when they're stressed out, what emotion manifests? Aggression.
Yeah.
Aggression. Because aggression, when you're in a fight, that's what you need, is aggression. That's what beats the saber-toothed tiger. But the key is avoid the fight, because once you get into gunfights, you're throwing the dice. And I equate it to, my emotions had already come back down, and I was thinking more rationally than the other guys. Not that they're dumb or irrational or unemotional or any of that jibber jabber, but it was because my plane had basically, my emotional aircraft had gotten back on the runway a little bit quicker than the other people. And I was like, there's no friggin' way that I'm going back through that village, because I know nothing good will happen if we go back through that village. We will get into a fight. And so that, as well as when I say tools, right? Tools and practices. The tools are the things that we teach that is down there for helping to regulate the nervous system so that you can get through the practices. And the practices are like battle drills, right? So BRM is a tool, right? And then breathing is a tool for basic rifle marksmanship. The practice is the battle drill. So that later when you're in an actual battle, all of the tools that you learned and used in the practice come to bear when it's the same thing what we were doing out at Darcy. So but this is just emotional, nervous regulation stuff.
Well, yeah, and that's there's a lot of information to unpack there, from evolving, getting yourself out of a rut, warming yourself up, preparing yourself ultimately, like from the individual evolution perspective. One, you've identified your curiosity, because that's one of the things that I've always known about you, is like you're constantly looking for a problem set to solve. And a lot of things that I've seen you work on over the years, they're not like problems that would interest a lot of people. They're just problems that are interesting to you, and you don't really give a fuck. You're like, okay, whatever. Like, nobody else is into it, I'm into it. That's fine. I'm okay with that. So having the confidence knowing that, okay, I can actually just work on this problem set regardless of whether or not my peers are into the same problem set, because it makes sense to me, which there's a lot to unpack there just from an individual psychology and confidence perspective. And so when I said contrarian earlier, it's like your peers will be doing something and it won't make sense to you. You'll go, that doesn't really make sense. I'm going to do something else, regardless of whether or not you think it's socially acceptable, you're going to do it, right? And you're going to be, and I've seen it, like I've seen it over the years. And I'll give you guys a couple of different examples. Like back in the day, Jeff was wearing 5 fingers, these like Vibram 5 fingers, these Vibram 5 fingers before anyone else had these, and everybody used to just take pot shots. Like, what the fuck are those? Those are monkey feet or whatever. And then pretty soon, fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, everybody's wearing them, right? Kettlebells, same thing. Kettlebells, flipping around kettlebells. Nobody knew what the hell that was. And then fast forward a few years, then everybody's flipping those things around. It's interesting when somebody's ahead of the curve from a lot of these, like whether it's like exercise science or whether it makes sense, whether it not make sense, but ultimately you're just unpacking it, being fairly objective and very confident in your curiosity, which I think is super interesting because I've thought about it a lot where we've had these conversations over the years, and you and I've had these like so many different tactical conversations around. We're talking about the use, like myelination of the brain, using both halves of the brain, and so we always shoot left side, right side, left side, right side. So our entire warm up pistol rifle was always weak side, strong side, weak side, strong side, weak side, strong side, and we'd go back and forth. To even now, I have a left-handed bow and I have a right-handed bow. And I was talking to Rogan about it. It was like, well, I shoot left-handed, right-handed both. He's like, what? Why? That's crazy. I'm like, no, not really. When you think about it, when you unpack the science behind it, like one, I'm using all the stabilizers, all the same little muscles that you have to use within pulling a string and shooting an arrow, same thing, left side, right side. The other thing is I'm reinforcing my shooter's checklist, which is something that comes directly out of what we used to do all the time, like stance, grip, side alignment, side picture, trigger, squeeze, follow through, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, weird. That's like a string that you can pull on my back from years of doing it, but it's always left side, right side, balance and creating those balance. So for me, when I see you getting yourself from one profession to the next, it's really following curiosity. I see a lot of guys that might not have the confidence to follow their curiosity, if that makes sense.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay, because if you find, and this is probably it's so overstated, but if you find that thing that inspires you, it's like at the end of the day, what's the best exercise? What is the best exercise program to follow? Is it CrossFit? Is it powerlifting with Mark Rippetoe? And as the older I get, the more it's like my mom that's the granny, right? Gardening is the best exercise. Why is that the best exercise for her? Because she consistently does it every single day. She enjoys it. The best exercise is not the Goggins run yourself into the ground. The best exercise is the one that you can consistently do every single day, the one that inspires you. That's it. The one that'll get you out and moving. Yeah, you can have forays and all these other stuff, but that's the best thing. And so the best way to get yourself out of a rut is to figure out, think hard, have your community of people that you trust. We call it AVAR, authentic, vulnerable, accountable, reciprocal. Get your community together if you're in a rut and identify what inspires you. Mm-hmm. What inspires you? Because then if you do that, that's really where you start digging in and you start finding these truths and inspirational moments that really start driving stuff forward. Really, if you think about it, that's the story of Black Rifle Coffee, right? Is because you loved coffee and it's like you came to me at one day and it's like, I'm going to start a coffee company. And I was like, okay.
Cool.
And so we did cool.
Yeah.
So we did all that work on like coffee shops and stuff. And it was like, oh my gosh, there's a ton of profit in this, but how do you get people through? And then you were just like, I don't know, I'm going to figure it out. And boom. And off you went. And and the rest is, as they say, is history, because and it's like coffee. You mean like, and it was like, you mean like Starbucks or something? Yeah. Or what are you in it? It was like, no. It's going to be X, Y, and Z. And this is the way that we can do it. And there was so much enthusiasm that was behind it. The reality, psychology is infectious, right? The reality was, it was infectious. It was like all of a sudden everybody around you was getting excited about coffee when it was like, it's coffee. But everybody was super excited about it because it was the thing that you loved. that is the secret. And I know that it's like, maybe that'll make money and maybe it won't make money. But if you got to get yourself out of a rut, then start doing the tools and practices that are the mainstay, the physical, psychological, and emotional. And then go to your community, preferably do those things with your community so that you can identify those things that inspire you and motivate you, and then dig in like a tick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been using this thing now recently where people always say, and it's like this Pinterest quote that drives me fucking bananas. It's like, find something you love, you'll never work another day in your life. And it's like, no, find something you love so much that when the depths of your darkness and you don't think that you can take another fucking step because the pressure of the world and every ounce of your human fucking existence doesn't want to take another step, you can still move forward because it's the only thing that's going to get you through. It's not finding, picking up a camera because you love cameras and that's like Trustafarian Pinterest quote bullshit. It's find something that you love and that you're curious about. So when it's so bad,
when the poison arrows are coming from the sky and the trolls are popping out and they're calling you, a bad human being because how dare you come up with something different than the Borg collective, that you can give them the middle finger and go, no, I'm just going to keep grinding on.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks, man. I appreciate it. We've been at, 2 hours? 3 hours. Holy shit.
Wow.
3 hours, dude. That flew by. So we'll have you back next few weeks. We'll have Jeff back. We got lots to talk about. We're just scratching the surface.
Lots more dumb stories.
That was awesome. Thanks, man.